right, welcome everybody to the Imperial 80s. It's good to be with you this Monday. Mtume, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Finally, leaving the gauntlet of end of the semester. I still got some grades to do and things to tie up, but I survived another one. At least so far. We'll see. We'll see how the fallout is on the body after and the
I was just
soul.
thinking about, yeah, I was thinking about all that because, like, I don't know what it's like for professors as much, but God, the end of the semester was so rough as a student in college. Like, it was just like, oh
Oh
God, like
yeah.
all these finals and essays and everything else. And,
Well, that's
you know,
part of it because they're stressed. The student body is stressed. You're stressed because they're stressed, and also the other stresses that happen with the professors. And then the funny thing about college, especially if you go to a college where a resident with a higher amount of residents, there's this thing where you're like, all right, you gotta do all this. Now you gotta leave. You know, like they
yeah,
make the students leave
no,
on
I know.
graduation day, which is like just wild to me. I actually think back in the days we had longer. I do think we had longer because I feel like I
I
would
had a
remember that.
I had a couple of days after graduation,
Same.
if I remember correctly, to, like, get my stuff all out and all of that, like, because I remember being there and there was, like, only, like, a few people left on campus, but yeah, that's yeah. Yeah, I y anyway,
Yeah.
um,
How are you?
so well, I'm okay. As I was talking about beforehand, you know, um, not only are the '80s a long time ago, but I was reminded this weekend that the '90s and the early 2000s are a very long time ago to a lot of people, and, I guess even to us in some ways. It doesn't, like, it never feels that way to me, and this is an interesting thing about it's actually caused me to, like, think about this series a little bit interestingly too. It's like, yeah, the '80s are a long time ago. When people ask
Mhm.
about it, they're like, "Well, why don't you do something recent?" And I'm like, "Why?" Like, this is the stuff of our childhood, but it's like, for a lot of people, obviously, it is not at all the stuff of their childhood. Um, but I went to a concert in Philly this weekend, and it was a state property reunion. So Beanie Siegel, Freeway, Young Guns, Petey Crack was there. I can't remember if Oshino and Sparks were there. I think they were
Mhm.
there, but they weren't, like, listed, which is not surprising. And then the Locks were the middle, the second group, and then the headliners were Method Man and Redman, which, as I mentioned to you, like, look, I all of them I loved in different ways, growing up, but um, I didn't necessarily feel like Method Man and Redman at this point are the biggest draw, and I don't think that they were based on the crowd that was there. Um, but the fascinating thing about it for me was, like, and maybe Temple's already out, I don't know, that might explain some of it, but, there was nobody under the age of 35 in the arena, and most of the people there were in their mid to late 40s, 50s, and 60s, I would say, and,
60s. Whoa.
there were definitely
Wow.
some
Okay.
60s in the building,
I say that only
but
to say shout out. Shout out to getting the concert.
yeah. I mean, otherwise, it's just 50 the '50s look real rough for for our group of people, like,
That might not be
um,
wrong either.
I don't know. Um, but anyway, it was really interesting. It was an interesting sociological experience, and to see who was there and who was not, and I mean, it was great. The show was great. It was a good scene. It was good to see, like, a lot of the state property guys have dealt with health issues too, so, like, that was kind
Yeah.
of, like, apparent as well. Like, the artists also are in their, 50s at least. And so, yeah, it was fascinating. It was a good show, but it did, like, the lack of any interest from young people, even in North Philly, to have nobody of a younger generation to come to see, like, I was trying to place State Prop within the lineage of hip hop in Philly, but they're at least like a top 3 or top 4, like, act as a whole group. I mean, you have Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff. You have, obviously Meek Mill, uh,
Mhm.
for a younger generation, and then there's younger people, there's younger artists, and there's some older folks too, Schoolie D, right? But like, on a like, and it was interesting doing it because a lot of it, obviously, there's a lot of references to Rockefeller and the Rock, like
Right.
they can't not do that, right? Even though that the contentiousness of kind of how that all ended. Um, that's just the catalog of songs that people know, right? And so, yeah, anyway, it was interesting. It was an interesting moment for me of like, yeah, this is what the old folks home is going to be like for our generation. It's going to be us like sitting around listening to the Locks and State Property and like Too
Yeah.
Long Shorts and
I mean, it is get kind of funny when you begin thinking about it. I mean, that's probably a well, I guess it could be in the Ferris Bueller conversation to a kind of like tangentially, but there is like this. I always have this thing about like, being 60 bumping cream or like the mystery of chess boxing. And something about it just does feel off, though there are moments when, yeah, Schoolie D, Steady
Steady
B, Cool
B
C.
and Cool C.
Was
Yeah.
Cool C is because was 3 times dope Philly or no? Right?
Yeah.
3 times dope is
Yeah.
Philly, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I
But
think all of them, but yeah.
yeah. So, but like I have this thing where I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know how much it like when I try to like really take it seriously, being 60s and you know, shame on a is playing. I'm a little like, I don't know, especially now that I'm having a daughter. So, that's a whole other, we talked about that. I mean,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of it. Like I was saying, my parents used to take me to like Bob Dylan and like people from that generation. And like the funny thing is like we felt like that was a million years ago as kids. We're like, oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
reliving the 60s. And then you think about it and like, well, if I was in the early, if I was in the 80s and I was going to see an artist from the 60s, that's actually not even as long ago as going to see
Right.
like Redman like now, you know. But it was there were younger people at those concerts, but I think it was because also there is something about my parents had no issues, sharing Bob Dylan's music with me, whereas I do feel a little uncomfortable playing, a lot of the stuff that we were listening to around my kids, even if they're listening to nonsense as well, right? So,
Right.
you know,
Right.
it's mostly on those solo drives to, Trader Joe's or whatever that I
It kind of hinders your ability to critique theirs. They're like, but daddy, come on, dad. You was bumping Sean Price. You know what I'm saying? I heard you yesterday bumping, the boot camp click. Come on, Pop. One of interesting thing is, and I gotta hit up one of my homies out west. I'm curious, like, is it like the same for like groups like Hyro and E40, other like really big groups that had or have like legend within areas, and like the area is definitely where their legend like spurns from, because I know Hyro still tours heavily, especially on the west coast and the southwest and northwest and all of that. But I'd be curious the makeup of their shows. Of course, if anyone knows that in the chat, let us know. But I'd be curious about that actually, because I went to a Hyro show in Cali, but this was years ago. This was like almost 20 years ago. No, less than 20 years ago. No, I'm sorry. It was probably when I went there. It was like 16, 17 years ago. If I think about it, when I was out in Santa Cruz. And like, there was definitely people who were like 18, 19, but I was 30 at that time. So it's
right.
like, it's a different age gap. I wonder if Hyro's rocking now,
They're still
how is it
touring.
looking? Yeah,
Yeah,
they
I
were
don't know.
they were in New York and I was working. so I couldn't go. I need to hit my homie because he went. I'm actually curious the demographic of that. But high road shows in New York have always been a little funny. In general, like that would always be a crowd. I think that is older because there is also in New York the kind of like, but I don't know how much it lasts anymore. The like the tastemaker, like, cool person who listens to all of the like stuff from the old stuff. But I don't know like if that's a couple of individuals, that's not really like a grouping, I think. I don't know. It's tough. I don't source my students on that stuff as much as I used to. I used to, but I don't I don't know. There's times I don't really want to know what they're looking at because I didn't want to have
Yeah.
conversations with me about like euphoria, and I don't want to have conversations about that, but
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. One thing I can just say anecdotally is that there was more diversity in age and race, ethnicity at both the Clips show and the Wu-Tang show I went to last year. And also like the Raphael Sadiq show I went to last year, right? So I was like,
oh,
you
interesting.
know, so it's not really so much. There was something specific going on that I still like. I need to do like sociological experiments around like
The Raphael Sadiq one
why.
is throwing me off. Actually, the clips make sense because they just had a really big album. They're out right now. Wu
That's true.
Tang because I think because of like their kind of global kind of hold. But then when you said Raphael Sadiq, I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't work. I do love Raphael Sadiq, but I'm like, wait a minute, I'm expecting to only see like a post 40s Soul House crew roll up to see Raphael Sadiq.
I don't know. All right, let's get
Mhm.
let's get into this movie. Um,
Oh yeah.
so I guess like yeah, let's start with the childhood stuff. Our early memories of this. Go ahead.
So, I mean, so this is what I'm actually curious going to an age thing. If we kind of keep that same framing, I, was there anyone of a certain age who escaped this movie? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It to me, it just felt ubiquitous. I actually don't remember a world before this movie, to be honest with you. It came out 86. I was 6. I'm sure I didn't see it in the theater, but I probably saw it maybe like within this first moment on cable. I think my parents got a kick out of this movie. Like my mother and my father were perfectly fine with this movie being on. They liked watching it. Um, I watched it a ton. Like it was on. One of the things that I can't tell because I can't kind of do like a psychological, breakdown of my like 6, 7, 8-year-old self is I don't quite know what the fascination was because I can say I do remember I would not have any kind of emotional or situational relation to Ferris. I feel like if I can liken it to some things that I saw later that fascinated me, like when I watched The Breakfast Club. For me, I was seeing a world that I was completely locked out of and had no idea about. Like suburbs, white people, who have these like emotional issues but have this kind of freedom. I probably was like a bit jealous or envious of like this kind of freedom or wishful, right? Like, ooh, that's a really interesting kind of world, but like no kind of understanding of like, politics and the totality of things. So it was like very idealistic. So I think I kind of like envied it in like a kid kind of way. I was like, oh, this is really cool. And he's able to do all this stuff and manipulate everything. It was funny, right? And I think I kept that all the way through to my preteen, early teen years. When I got about 13, 14, I don't think I wasn't really into stuff like this anymore. I kind of like got out of it. It wasn't something that like interested me. So I stopped watching it. If it came on, I would like, oh yeah, 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 Ferris Bueller, ha ha ha, and like, or he became like a running joke of a name. When I got a bit older though, probably in like my early 20s, I watched it again and I had a very different reaction to the movie. Not that I disliked it. or like had this like any kind of read on it, but I was having a reaction to actually, I think, the experience in high school that I had with white males. And for context, I went to LaGuardia High School, the performing arts school, right? So if people know anything about that school, it's a big mix school, right? It's the fame school, right? So what I mean by mix is mix of races, mix of class dynamics, everything, because you got in there by your artistic talent. So you had people with lots of money up in there, and you had kids with no money. You had kids who were straight laced. You had kids who were on the street doing doing the do, right? It was a mix, and the race and class kind of like warfares that would happen in that school were pretty could be pretty significant amongst like all types of shit, like black class stuff, like black, and I had experiences, I think, with that I don't think I remember with white kids who had a sense of a kind of like cavalier, free attitude. And I even hung out with some of them where I would go to their places and their parents wouldn't be there. Some of them are actors that people knew, like all types of shit that had that other part of my life. So I like met some of these like Ferris Bueller style kids, right? And I think by the time I got out of high school, I grew a huge disdain for them, right? A lot of kids, like, like, especially like, and it's funny because there's one right now who's a real estate. I'm thinking, I'm having like two splintered thoughts. I'm gonna say it, then I'll add the other thing. So there's this other thing, and it comes a lot about in hip hop of white kids with lots of money who hung out with poor black and Latino kids, right? And they wanted to, and they were the low lifes. I don't know if anybody remember who the low lifes were. They were all these kids who were like polo, right? There's one distinctly
Thurston
that I
Howell the third,
to how the third, right? Yeah, Rack Low, the low
Master
life,
Fool.
Master Fool, right? Yeah, Rack Low, shout out, right? And there was like some white kid low lives, and the reason why they were low lives is because they had the money to buy all the polo gear, right? It's funny because a bunch of them are now like big real estate people in New York, doing all types of wild shit, fucking over working class people. But that's a whole other conversation, or maybe it's not actually. But but with that being said, I had a lot of antagonisms that grew from that kind of social experience. So when I got out of college and I came back to New York to the city, I mean, I was in Purchase, so I wasn't that far. But when I got back into the city, I had noticed like my energies was not really cool to that. So when I saw this movie again in my 20s, I had that kind of response to it. It reminded me of that kind of cavalier attitude. And it's not that I've like so I stopped watching it. I think I just kind of like cut it off. And then a couple of years ago, I watched it again. And then oh, no. It was when they did the ad. I can't remember what it was where they had Ferris Bueller grown up. There was like an ad that they did with Matthew Broderick as Ferris grown up. And I remember making this joke because I was kind of like, oh yeah, I don't know. Ferris definitely is running some big ass Fortune 500 company doing some wild shit. Him and Cameron. Cameron's doing something on one end, Ferris is doing something on the other, right? And he's probably fucked over Sloan at some point. And she's, and I hope she got a big paycheck out of it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's my thought, right? And Jeannie's fucked up too, but like that's kind of my thought that I had when I saw that. And yeah, so that's kind of how this movie situates to me. So definitely when I watching it again for this, I was ready to kind of like dig in.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be so much to get into. Although there's actually like, it's funny rewatching it when you realize like how much emptiness there is in this film. Like how many like there's these like large stretches of like 30 minutes where like really nothing happens that's anything other than just like showing. It's just like shots, right? Basically, and like this scene, this scene. Um, which is also interesting in some ways of like how did it have such a a hold on us in the 80s because I mean, it absolutely did. I mean, I do remember life before this movie. But you know, I saw it in the 80s for sure. I believe the first time I saw it was at this family's house that my parents both, whatever, they worked later. And so like I went somewhere after school and would stay there like after school until my parents would come pick me up every day, basically. And that was a space where I saw a lot of stuff that my parents probably wouldn't have shown at home, but there were older kids there. There was different stuff there. And this wasn't one that would have bothered my parents in any kind of way either. And I did watch it at home and they didn't care about that, but I didn't have access to it. Right. And that's the other thing about the 80s, which I think is very interesting within this film, because one of the things that came up again and again as I was watching it now is like, I don't know the relevance of this film today. Like if a younger person watched this film, they would just say, well, like none of this is possible because of the internet. Like it's there's a certain way in which like the internet makes this film a total impossibility. I mean, there's all of the ways in which things don't make sense in terms of the passage of time and like the distance traveled and all that kinds of stuff in it. But the biggest thing is that like the level of surveillance that kids are under nowadays would actually make this impossible for children nowadays. And it wasn't entirely. I mean, it's definitely far-fetched, and it is definitely, as we will get into, very much an upper class, like, I mean, it's like the very edges of upper middle class kind of lifestyle, in the Imperial core. Maybe in the 80s, it's upper middle class. We can get into some of that stuff a little bit, but it's definitely a level at which was really actually clearly beyond the aspirations of anyone that I grew up around in terms of just like the money, the consumerism, all of that stuff that's present within the film. But the way that it structured my aspirations growing up or spoke to them, and that's the hard part that's hard to disentangle so much for me watching this film, is like, did I wanna be sick and pretend, or did I wanna pretend to be sick so that I could have a day off from school because of Ferris? Or was that just a natural impulse that everybody feels that Ferris spoke to, you know? But there's a way in which, like, even when I was in high school, when I would cut a class or whatever, or sign myself out to, go to the dentist and like skip all the other classes and use that as my excuse for the whole day or whatever it was, like that I felt like, oh, this is like a Ferris. Like there was a way in which it felt that way, right? Like the idea of Ferris's day off, um, on some level was like, this is what fun is, right? This is what it means to like have a good day in a certain kind of way. And we'll get into that. Um, but there was definitely, something about it growing up that was very alluring. And another thing I was thinking about watching this film, right, is like, and this is like a real question to the audience, is like, is the 80s and then maybe the 90s, are these the last decades of, like, good teen films? And I don't mean that, like, good in some kind of, like, value neutral, like, I'm saying, like, this is a great movie, right? Like, I understand ideologically this film is quite insidious, and we'll get into all of the ways that way. But, like, are there movies for younger generations that have this type of impact on them, and that are like this kind of an event, this kind of a blockbuster, this kind of like I mean, this gets to a level where like Nancy Reagan giving a like graduation speech is quoting Ferris Bueller in this movie, right? Like, so there's these kinds of things that are going on where like there's a resonance to this, all the way up, and we can talk about that. I mean, Ben Stein is an interesting figure in this because he's the Bueller, right? He's also the speechwriter for Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, and a close ally of the Bush administration, right? And so there's like and I think he references Bush actually in it, talking about like the economic, voodoo
Voodoo
economics.
economics.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so there's like a lot there, but it's just to say that this film was massive, like, and John Hughes in general, like, I know this we've done Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is different type, different end of his film, although there's some kind of overlap there. But like, and by the way, I was in Giant grocery store the other day, and Every Time You Go Away was playing the song from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Anyway, but John Hughes has this very big role as a filmmaker in the 80s and the early 90s in these types of films. Like, we will also, of course, do The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, 16 Candles, all of this kind of stuff, St. Elmo's Fire. But this one, in for some reason, this one as a younger person, like, those movies were interesting, and I watched them more when I was, like, getting closer to high school age, that there was kind of some interest in revisiting some of that stuff. But as a young kid, this is like, "Oh, like, this is my goal in life somehow," right? It becomes, like, to have a Ferris Bueller style day. And I do think that that continued to persist for me, probably even through college and maybe even a little bit early after. Not to say that like it's on some conscious level of I'm like rewatching it and going back and like I need to like not that level, but just in terms of like what you imagine in America to be like a good day. And there's a lot we'll get into as we get into this movie around that, right? And around like what is being promoted as that good day. Um, but it was very significant in that effect. And yeah, it's not a one that I've gone back to a lot, but I will say like if it's on or if like it's a movie that still has like some kind of draw to me. Um, interestingly, and I've talked about these, but my wife hates it, and I was like, "Well," I was like, "Do you hate?" She said, I don't hate the movie. I hate Ferris." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "We'll tell, which we'll get it." Like, I think we all hate Ferris to some degree as we get into this, but I didn't. As a kid, I didn't hate Ferris, but she said, "Well," I was like, "Well, what is it? What? Tell me," because I was like, "I want to share this with folks." And she's like, "Oh," I was like, "Well, just." She's like, "Ferris is a fuck boy." She's like, "He is the epitome of the white entitled fuckboy, and I've encountered this type of person so many times, da 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 da." I was like, "Huh, interesting." But I think that's a good way to sort of frame it in some ways. And I will say just I didn't have so many kids like that in high school. There probably were some, but when I went away to college, there was a lot of New England prep school students, kids who had gone to like the sort of, you know, the equivalent of the Ivy League for high school, prep school stuff that were there. And I hated those kids. And I think that they very much embodied this, like, not only as an aspiration, but they could actually live the way that Ferris did. Right. And that breeds a certain type of person that, yeah, also was probably running Fortune 500 companies and things like, or like big private equity stuff. The type of people who were trying to go into like Goldman Sachs and, all of that kind of stuff out of my college. And so, yeah, anyway, that's my story with the film.
No, no, to add, my lady, I asked her about the film as well, and she said, "I never liked Ferris. Ferris is just, like, really fucking annoying." And she said, "And Cameron too." She's just like, "This is all annoyed the shit out of me," right? And there is a question that I actually have had, and I should probably should have did it more, is I actually do curious about, like, the gender politics of this movie, and even the, like, gender expression of, like, this, like, white male heterosexual male cisgendered male kind of thing of the 80s. And then, if you see Ferris as kind of another entry of like the various types of dominant white male. Um, and there's another thing with the movie that I think my reaction ended up happening is the thing to remember is Matthew Broderick is not from Chicago. He is a Manhattan kid. And when he says lick your palms, I just fucking hear New York. And I say, so like that's where the reaction comes from. I know this dude, right? Like I know him. And they're annoying as fuck. And they're slick and they do a lot of like underhanded shit. Right. And they get away with it. Right. So I wonder, especially when they were younger, like if a young woman is watching this movie and they're like, okay, right? And then, Jeannie, which we'll get to, is the only person that you kind of have to, or Sloan are like your two options of like emotional connection, the very, very, very limited. Anyway, but I could be wrong. I'm more throwing that question out there, actually, not making a determinant, because I'd be curious to know, like, the different responses to it. I think let's start digging into the movie a little bit, like the origins of it. I had my papers right here. So like we said, this is directed by John Hughes. This is his fourth directed film. It's his 10th written film. So like he's kind of in like the peak of his powers at this moment. Breakfast Club has been out, Weird Science. He's like really, 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 kind of like really, really kind of going up. He apparently wrote the screenplay in like a week. It was like quickly pitched. It was like something that was put together. One of the big rumors is that they shot it. Well, not maybe not rumors. One of the big stories is it's like I think the original cut is a 3-hour cut. Because he didn't actually like edit the script. So they ended up most of the editing happened on basically on in the editing room in post-production. He calls it like his love letter to Chicago, said he wanted to capture Chicago and the landscape and the architecture and things like that, which I would like to talk about at some other point, because there is a thing about Hughes that I've always said. I feel like Hughes is one of the biggest defenders of liberalism, of a certain strand of like liberalism that I think American movies have ever had. Um, some of it is implicit, I think, in how he celebrates a certain kind of like liberal Americana, but sometimes it is explicit in when he'll like reference something like fascism, like he does in this movie, or socialism. I think communism is referenced in Pretty in Pink, if I remember correctly. And these are not like big exhaustive things. They're like comparisons that he'll make and throw things in there. And it if you add that to the totality of it, you just see his kind of like big defense of the liberal project, which I think adds to something that Jay was bringing up about the interest in like teens. And I think this is where I think it's like, I think in the 80s, if you watch 70s movies were big on people in like their 20s and 30s, right? And what they meant within the kind of Americana, right? You didn't really have teen movies where they got to have like a say on like the kind of like ideological terrain of America. In the 80s and the early 90s, there was this big investment in teens being the mouthpiece. I mean, think of go back to Iron Eagle. I mean, look, when like the three young men have the conversation about Roddy Reagan, like they're literally setting the political framework that America must do amongst fucking teenagers, right? So like there's this way that I think this movie, yes, it's seen as like this frivolous thing, but I think it's really, and Hughes is using as a mouthpiece to really get off the kind of ideological, I think, tone that they kind of want to like level set. Yeah, I mean, it was like a very successful movie, $5 million budget, $70 million made. I mean, huge, successful. Um, yeah, like the pitch went really quick. I mean, another one is another one of those movies where, like, when you read back the kind of making of, you kind of have to sift through a lot of the like the gook of like just gushing over it. So one of the other big rumors that I do find interesting, there's a big rumor that it's basically Ferris is based after a friend of his called Edward McNally, right? And he was a high school guy who he went to school with, and apparently he says, yeah, he cut school a lot. Apparently, he cut school 27 times one year. And that, he had a very like hardcore principal, or I think it was a vice principal who would basically chase after him. um, the funny thing is, like, if you see about Edward McNally, he runs like a huge law firm, right? He becomes like a very, very, very like powerfully rich kind of guy. And they used to do things like they borrowed a car, like the Ferrari thing kind of comes from a real thing that they actually almost tried to do, right? They were very, very much out there causing ruckus, very minorly, getting away with stuff, and then transferred into a life where John Hughes would eventually go on to be a major person in Hollywood, and McNally could run law firms, right? So like that was one of the people who was like seen as like an inspiration for it. As far as the casting, he said he wrote it for Broderick, but there's also a rumor that Anthony Michael Hall was offered it. I don't really understand the kind of with that, but whatever. They always say these things. Broderick was 24, which I think is really interesting. Alan Ruck, who plays Cameron, was I think the original offer, no, Estevez was the original offer and he turned it down. Ruck was offered it. Ruck was 29 when he made the movie, which I think is another interesting thing. This thing of like people who are actually fucking grown, playing these characters, especially the male characters, because Sara, who plays Sode, was 18. So it's funny how these things are coded, right? Like the high school kid man is kind of is an older person. I actually don't know how old Jennifer Grey was. I actually should look that up. And Sara is 18, and they make the triumvirate of it, right? So it's very, 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 very interesting, and I'm sure we could do all the additions with that. Jeffrey Jones is another interesting person who plays Rooney. I won't go too much into Jeffrey Jones's future. I don't know if we want to do that. Jeffrey Jones, as many people probably do know, I think was it in the 2010s when it started coming out about his child, like the molestation rumors and things like that about him. I can't remember what decade. I think it's the 2010s. I could be wrong. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about molestation, and I mean, it's very, 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 very like wild. I mean, his career is essentially kind of done from that. People have saw the new Beetlejuice movie, which I didn't. They like killed him out of it because he's basically doesn't have a career anymore because of what's happened with the totality of that. But Jones at that time was kind of his career was kind of starting, and he got the role because people have seen Amadeus. He plays I think it's the king or something like that in Amadeus, and he says he basically wanted him to play the king, the same role in this movie, but like with a bigger role. And we'll get into like the kind of what that character is, and it's a movie that I don't and that I also noticed it's a big movie that really relies on soundtrack. I've noticed. I feel like more than a lot of other 80s movies, it's really reliant on. Let me not say that. Maybe like Back to the Future is also like that. But this movie does it in a particular way where it's like whether it's immediately in the movie, like the big float scene, or like some of the score, quote unquote, or the thing that are used to kind of like edit the movie, the montage, because it's a big montage movie, or doing a lot of cross cutting because you have at times like four to five different threads happening trying to hit a convergent point at the end of the movie, right? So they're using a lot of music, stuff like that, to kind of connect everything. Yeah, Brittany. Yeah, the stuff about Jones is true. Yeah, I mean, dig into it. You can go into it online. It's pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah. We should have known. He was such a jerk in this movie, right? Like we should have.
I know, and there's a comment about that too. It's interesting because then you feel weird because like there's a
Yeah.
way that I mean, this is like a big thing to me about the movie is how we're situating where the authoritarians are,
Yeah.
right? It's in the schools, you know.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing too, because you talked about it in the sense of liberalism, and I agree because I know you're talking about liberalism in like the kind of big sense, like the kind of overall political ideology of liberalism, not necessarily like the sort of left right dynamic within the imperial core. But I do think that Hughes is a like I don't know his own politics, but his movies are very conservative. Like I just feel like they're very conservative and really promote conservative aspects um, of political ideology, right? And one obviously is the kind of anti-school thing, which like on some level, one of the things that this film speaks to is that high school is bullshit. Like, and this is true. High school in America is absolutely bullshit, right? Like, but it's not for the same reason as this film, wants you to. It's not because it's just, well, I mean, there are like a lot of dumb things that you have to do just because you're sort of told to do it. So like that part of is true, but high school is not necessarily like meaningless or childish, right? As Ferris calls it, because like I guess just for the same reasons that they're laying out, right? Which like is sort of like there's an interesting commentary in this film that we'll get to later on about none of them liking anything or really knowing what they want to do, right? Which I think is something a lot of teenagers just go through. But it's like there's no commentary, of course, about like the meaningless of existence under capitalism, right? And that capitalism promotes and forces us to learn ridiculous stuff, and like that it's all for the basis of like function within the system.
S-
um
I want to say
so
one thing to can I say
yeah.
one thing to that point. I think Hughes also is big part of a tradition of naming every other social system, fascism, socialism, communism, but never actually saying capitalism as a name. So
Mm,
essentially, the life that we, or even liberalism, like the world that we have is normality.
yeah.
Everything else is abnormality.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we can get into it because it comes up at the very beginning of the film anyway. But as we get into a lot of that stuff, like there are ways about. I think one of the things that's sinister about this film is that it does tap into like real kind of psychological crises that people experience, young people experience in our society, but like pushes them towards a like off a cliff basically. Like it just like accelerates that into this kind of meaningless. Like this is a deeply fucking nihilistic film. Like it really is. Like this is about like how uh it is selling a depravity of like late capitalist existence as this like great day. you know anyway, we'll get into it, but yeah. um
Jennifer Grey
Go
was
ahead.
also 29.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, a
no, no,
lot of
no.
them
She was 20. No, she was 20. My bad. I was wrong. She was 20.
oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, she
because
was 20.
she was also in what's the Reds movie we did, the not Reds but the
Yeah,
Red Dawn.
Red
Red
Dawn,
Dawn.
right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think she
yeah,
does Dirty Dancing like right after this.
yeah.
I think it's like the year or two after it.
Did she and Sheen get in a relationship after this movie?
Her and Broderick did.
Oh, really? Okay.
And there's another story that I don't really want to go into because of about a car accident. Yeah, a fatal car accident that they're both in the car in another country. I think it was in Sweden or something like that. And oh yeah, it's a whole thing from the 80s. They were freed of charges about it. It's a whole other like rabbit hole. I have no legal opinions. I've never done any kind of legal digging, nor am I qualified to do a legal digging on any of that. But yeah, there is that. But she might have dated Sheen. I mean, they all were dating each other. Like that's the funny thing. Well, the most funny is Ireland. That's where it was. It was Ireland, right? The funniest one is a marriage that happens in this movie are the parents of Ferris Bueller in the
That's
film.
funny.
They met on set. They got married. His two parents.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. The last thing I wanted to say is that Ferris Bueller's Day Off, is part of the cultivation of the world in which people will beat the shit out of each other for Audemars swatch watches this past weekend. Like that's like the logical conclusion of this film. So anyways.
Yeah.
All
So I
right.
guess we could go into the movie. Yeah, so the movie starts interestingly because it it this is where I also feel like it's trying to be somewhat like not artsy, but like kind of like, you know, be artsy referencing because it doesn't start with like a big fanfare of like a movie that you would normally get in a lot of movies, right? It basically starts with, a home, right? You're seeing title cards and things like that, right? It's very very like small, right? The dog barking, you see the house, right? And then you see Matthew Broderick like laid out in bed, right? And his parents, it's just like a two shot of like the parents looking him over, right? And like he's like sick, and he has this very, it's it. I mean, the reference was made. I mean, he ended up doing. Did he end up ever doing a Woody Allen movie? But that was kind of the thing. One of Broderick's things, and we haven't really talked about how he came about. But one of Broderick's things was that he was kind of seen as like an heir to a certain kind of New York acting, right? Like the kind of he was kind of being developed in that, like the Dustin Hoffmans, the Woody Allens, right? He did like Biloxi Blues. So he would do like I think he did. No, he didn't do Brighton Beach Memoirs. He didn't do the movie of that, but he did Biloxi Blues. So there was always a prestige to that kind of acting in the 80s. Like, Hoffman, for whatever circle you went into, was seen as, maybe the greatest living actor, or at least the greatest living reference. Woody Allen would have that reference as well. So there was a real effort in the 80s to make Broderick one of the heirs to that throne. He never was really successful with it because Matthew Broderick can't really act like that. He ain't got no skill. He had a shtick at best. I'm dead serious. I mean, like, look, he got movies with like Sean Connery and Dustin Hoffman. Like he did.
You don't like Godzilla?
Well, that's the thing. That became the funny thing. After they tried to do it in the 80s, no one really bought it. And he realized, well, especially once he had to become like a man, like he hit his 30s, he couldn't really hack being a man in movies, right? And he had no range, right? For all of what do you say about Hoffman? Hoffman was a character actor. He could literally transform. Some of those transformations, like Rain Man, are kind of fucked up, but he could transform. Broderick could never do it. It was a shtick, right? So anyway, I think the movie is like really like leaning on like his like performing ability. So they're really trying to have, him sick, laid out. The parents come in, like there's no music, right? Like it's just very, 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 very like laid out and dramatic, right? You get like the score. You see his parents looking him over. You see Jennifer Grey, she's the sister. So they're trying to like, situate the family immediately. She's the sister who hates him. She's already annoyed. You already kind of know that she can't stand him, right? And they all do it in like really close shots, so you don't really know the context of much outside of the house. You're getting like little hits of things, but like nothing that much, except for when the parents finally say, Okay, you stay in bed, make yourself some soup and all that. Take care of my boy. We love you. You're the sweetest thing ever, right? Because they like oogle over him like he's a newborn. It's kind of hilarious in that kind of way. And then when they leave, you get the wide shot of this room with like, all these posters and stuff. And then he's up, right? And he's ready to kind of like start his day, you know.
Yeah, I mean, so like it's a good setup. I mean, the funny, I don't know, there's certain things about this film that bother me. There's a lot of them when you watch it of just like, this wouldn't work, right? Like the whole like first of all, you have to fake a fever if you are going to stay home from school. Like this is a basic thing. Like you cannot, you use the light, you use something to like, warm up the thermometer. Like, this idea that you can or you got to like throw up. Like you got to do something to like really sell it. And just this idea that like clammy hands and like, oh, my stomach hurts, like that your parents are gonna buy this shit. I mean, his parents are total fucking pushovers. But anyway, that's the
But Jay,
whole
but could this be but I'm gonna say this. Could this be a class thing?
yeah.
Could this be
No,
that? Because
absolutely.
like, yeah, my mom would be like, "Man, get your ass up and go to school, boy." Right? She would do that. But like, is this the thing of like the upper classes where like I have clammy hands. Oh, my boy, he might faint and hit his head on the concrete and die.
I mean, there is a certain degree too of like when you're a parent. I mean, I know this. I have a high school kid, right? Where you do know too that like high school is bullshit. And like, so it's like every once in a while you just give your kid like, okay, like whatever. Like I know that you're faking this right now, but clearly you don't want to go to school today. So like that is what it is. But the yes, I do think that there's a I mean, first of all, we should say a little bit about the area, like where Hughes is from, like where this film is shot, what this suburb is. So, like the house is actually in Long Beach, California, so it's not actually filmed in Chicago, at least this their specific house for whatever reason. But it's all based off of the suburb of Northbrook, which is outside of Chicago. It's like a 25-minute drive, super white, super wealthy. Like even at this point, the average median income is like $150,000, which is a lot for a median income. I mean, it's not necessarily a lot of money all by itself, but it also means there's a lot of people who are making, a whole lot more within the area. And yeah, so that's one thing. It is still, and it always has been like a very exclusive, wealthy, it's referred to as an affluent community, right? In just like normative sense, that's like how like Wikipedia and other places refer to it. And so this is where Hughes is from, and it is also where it's supposed to be kind of set. Like it's fictionalized, and it's fictionalized. I think it's actually the same town that he uses in a lot of his films. The same kind of fictional
Yeah,
town, but it's all based upon his own like upbringing. And so yeah, I mean the house itself is huge, right? Like they don't show a lot of it, but you see the external shot. It's this massive house for, two parents and two kids to be living in. It's not quite like a mansion in the way that you think about it, but it's sort of that big enough to be like it's probably like a four-bedroom, and it's a two-story house, just massive.
probably a
And
study, a basement, all of it. An
And
attic, all
all
of
of
it.
the houses in this film too, like, you get to see Cameron's house, which is
I
just
mean,
insane, right? And then you get to see you don't actually, I don't think, see Sloane's house, but the pool and jacuzzi that you're supposed to go to is supposed to be hers actually, which even though they don't ever explain that, but that's where they're supposed to be, which is also, like, very, very high-end, in-ground, like, jacuzzi plus pool, So, anyway, it's an extremely wealthy existence, and obviously we'll get to that as we go through the film too, but it kind of off the top, you can see that, and I think that yeah, I do think there is a class piece to it, and maybe that's Hughes also speaking from his own experience with people like that, or himself. I don't know. I mean, you said he's based on a friend of his, so
Yeah, I mean, like, so part of Hughes's story is that he grew up there, but he didn't necessarily have like that. Like he wasn't. He was probably closer to Ferris. He definitely wasn't Cameron, right? Um, because they say about Hughes is that a lot of it is a mixture of his reality, and some of it is a mixture of his like envy, right? And so like, well, there was a bit particular stratification, but at the same token, the war, not the warfare, but the what is a warfare and how they look at it. The kind of warfare that happens is this kind of like class warfare about people who have only like small steps between them, right? When it comes to anyone like outside of that, which we'll get to when we get to the auto garage guys, you can see also his like, and also in other movies like Plane, Trains, and Automobiles, and the vacation movies, we can see his disdain for anyone who is not from those areas, or the way he kind of caricatures them, right? But yeah, he has these weird things, and it's where it shows him like Pretty in Pink and all that type of stuff. It's part of his like really, I think, distorted, uneven, chaotic kind of like class stuff. But like for me, the other thing, and this is where like the movie has like an inconsistency, because I also feel like when I watch it, there's a way he's trying to like show you their affluence, but then also try to suggest that their affluence is not that big, or like really misrepresent their affluence, like with like the kind of car the mom drives. I'm like, no, if his mom's like she runs a real estate agency. I'm sorry, man. Homegirl is driving a Mercedes or some shit. Like, you just know she is. She's real estate. Like, come on, she's not driving. It's like a station wagon she was driving in the movie. I'm like, maybe if the kids were like 5, but she has 2 about to go to college children. She's not driving that. It's like a way that it doesn't make sense. But I think it's him trying to play with our kind of emotions. I think he wants to see these people as like the good family. Like that's the thing, because early in the movie, you're definitely situating that the parents are naive and a little dumb, but he doesn't make them bad people. Ferris's parents, they're like loving people, right? Cameron's parents we'll get to. That's a whole other thing. Sloane's parents in the original script, the dad is apparently supposed to have left his wife for a younger woman. That's why when they go to the house, no one is there. So like there's this kind of like suggestion that Sloane is kind of like left to her own devices, which kind of adds like Ferris is like her savior kind of. Like, do we really need? I'm just gonna stop, because everybody watching this stream is smart enough to know that bullshit in a movie and where that goes, right? But they actually cut a lot of that out. I'm sorry to say, because it didn't test well. There's like a big, go ahead.
Well, so basically, I mean, yeah, just to move forward in this, because we can get to a lot of this as we go through it. They buy it, right? And the whole time Jeannie is just like, are you serious? Like, like I could be dying, right? And you all would make me to go to school, and like he's obviously faking it, right? And so you get all that, and then you get the Ferris breaking the fourth wall, kind of breaking everything down, showering to beginning of the day. They bought it, my worst performance of the year or whatever, and they bought it, kind of thing. Recognizing that it's, as he says, it's the 9th time, which comes up again, that he has missed school. I can't remember if it's the semester or the year, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. I think year.
I think it's a year.
But
yeah.
And so, he said, I think he'd have to barf up a lung or whatever to get to 10. So you get that. There's some quotes here that we probably need to go to. So, because at one point, as he's doing it with his parents, he tries to play up that he actually wants to go to school. He needs to go to school because he's a test, but like, it's this tension of like, he's pretending that he's sick, but he's pretending like, oh, you guys can't make me stay home, right? Like, so just to really convince them that he's so sick that he can't go, right? And he had said that he has a test, right? And they're like, no, you got to stay home, kind of thing. I was like, oh, all right. Um, and so he says, I did have a test today. I didn't make that up. It's on socialism. I mean, really, what's the point? Oh, sorry, it's on European socialism. I mean, really, what's the point? I'm not European. I don't plan on being European. So who gives a crap if they're socialists? They could be fascist anarchists. That wouldn't change the fact that I don't own a car. So just stop for a sec, because the second part, you can go into in a sec. But the one thing that stood out to me in watching this a little bit is like the I'm not European, right? This is a very interesting thing, because it becomes like this film is very deep in promoting a certain brand of an American ideology, right? And here you have a European actor, Euro-American, obviously, right? But saying I'm not European, right? So like the I'm American, right? This is the idea. And it's a very interesting, it's like this nativist, kind of look, or this like settler, kind of American break of like, why do I need to know anything about Europe, right? Which is a very, like this is something that we're very much encouraged to do, even as white people within American society, is to sort of not actually learn about the history, culture, heritage at which your ancestors like came from. And you know whatever, like I get it, like there are cultural differences at this point. There, for many people, they came a long time ago, so there are like real distinctions in certain terms. But it is like this like severing, right, of white American people from their European history. And it's like it's very clearly done nonchalantly in a minute. And obviously he's saying socialism, he's saying fascist anarchist, so again throwing out all these ideologies, which then takes us to the next part of the quote, which I know you wanted to read.
Well, before we get to that, which is connected, I think this is really important, like you brought up, because I think this is like definitely that post World War II mentality, right? America is the hegemon, so we're no longer European, right? Oh, and white people, like we've made our own culture, we've conquered the world, we liberated Europe too. We're the reason why y'all not fascists, because I say saying that in like the context of also of invoking fascism, I think is really pointed, and I think is you're seeing Hughes's political read, because if you think about like European vacation, like how much he like shits on Europe, right? He really believes in the Americana, like the Americana is the project, right? It has its problems, which like the Roonies of the world, right? But Americana, but it is the project. It is like the highest level of white. So there's this next line that he says, not that I condone fascism or any ism for that matter. Isms, in my opinion, are not good. A person should not believe in an ism. He should believe in himself. I quote John Lennon, I don't believe in Beatles. I just believe in me. Good point there. After all, he was the walrus. I could be the walrus. I'd still have to bum rides off people. I mean, like, thesis of the film, like, boom, right? I was like, oh wow. Um, like it's wild. So, like, first of all, not that I condone fascism or any ism for that matter. So, the first part about the fascism is definitely that World War II mentality of we are not the same, right? I don't condone it. I'm not that. I am. He doesn't say liberalism, right? But or any ism, and this is like to me what I said, like when I said earlier, like a certain brand of liberalism, right? There is this brand of liberalism that I just think they see what America has done as not even being liberalism anymore. It's just like the normative. It's like the normative highest end of society. Like I was having an argument that I shouldn't have had with someone about the Enlightenment, and I was able to pull out of this guy that he sees the Enlightenment as basically the arrival of human consciousness to a kind of normal center, right? Like everything was before, it was below, right? What the Enlightenment gives us is a kind of like center. And his whole argument that I've heard before is that basically the Enlightenment was possible for every civilization. It's just that Europe got there first, right? And that's how they also justify slavery, because what they do with that is say if Africa hit the Enlightenment first, they would have enslaved other parts. I mean, it's Jay's, because Jay's heard it as well, I'm sure. It's a fucking bonkers mentality. But this to me is very consistent with someone like Hughes, right? But then it's the thing is isms, in my opinion, aren't good, is what he says. So this is where he kind of goes to his socialism. The problem is isms. Like a person should not believe in an ism. He should believe in himself, right? And this is the film, right? The belief of the self. And I could see where as a kid I was being indoctrinated to a certain kind of self-belief watching this movie. Like the thing that will make anything possible is a kind of over invested belief in oneself, right? And how do you activate that? Like how does one activate that? But I also find interesting, and I read the last part too, where he talks about the walrus. So China making Lenin, and people think of Lenin often as like the Beatle who was able to really be his own kind of thing. About the car, I'd still have to bum rides off people. So this thing about the car as an American freedom, right? Which is a thing that's been used for decades, even before the 80s. I mean, this idea of the car freedom, the car gives you access to freedom. He constantly bemoans that his parents didn't give him a car, right? They got him a computer, right? Instead, which he then uses to manipulate the world with it, or at least his small little world. But he had to bum ride. So the fact that they're kind of hindering his manhood because he doesn't have a car, right? It's like very consistent with this kind of Americana idea of like arrival into manhood, which is interesting because like think about the 80s takes another level with cars, Back to the Future, right? How the car functions with that. Movies like License to Drive that would come out, I think, a couple of years after that. Even a great commentary on it, like Christine, which I think is dope. Christine challenges that on the back end. They actually show that it's basically it's probably the death nail of American teens. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say with those lines, but like to me, those lines sitting out there, I watched it again. I was like, oh well, hell yeah, that's the movie right there.
Yeah, always. I mean, that stuck out to me for years, especially when I went back to it and watched, because I have rewatched it several times after not receiving, becoming more politicized, right? And like, that whole spiel always stands out, and it's interesting because I think when I was younger, I didn't know what any of that necessarily meant. I mean, I didn't know what fascism or anarchism or any of that were when I was watching it as a little kid. But that idea of like, you should believe in yourself. And this is the whole thing, too. Like, so I think it's really useful to situate this in the context of the 80s and the ideologies being pushed at the highest levels of society at the time. Obviously, a film like this is a reflection of that. But Ronald Reagan, here's a couple of quotes from Reagan. If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to an extent, to a greater extent than has ever been done before. I mean, it sounds like Trump in certain ways, but like that specific on the individual genius, right? He says only individuals are given a personal stake in deciding their own destiny, in benefiting from their own risks. Do societies prosper, grow, and remain free? Sorry, only when individuals are given that personal stake. So again, like this is hugely promoted American ideology in the period, right? And obviously it is deeply Cold War, like we should say, right? The whole point around the promotion of the individual, right, is as this ideological counterpoint to the collective, and then we'll take it to Thatcher, the other great promoter of this in the era, In 87, she says famously, there is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families, right? And another quote from her, we are all unequal. No one, thank heavens, is quite like anyone else. And we believe that everyone has the right to be unequal. And this was in a speech that opposed collectivism, right? And so there was this really thick, pointed ideological project around promoting the individualism and the freedom associated with the individualism, so that like and this is deep, this is the way when Americans talk about freedom, which is like you still will run into this all the time if you talk to people about communism or socialism, or you know it's this deeply embedded American fucking brainworms rot that they injected into us, right? That like in order for us to be free, though, we got to be able, we can't be constrained by organizations, parties, you know, any of this,
Mass
right? Like,
movements. What do they say about mass movement? It's a collective psychosis. The collective psychosis of mass movements. You can't do those things. Be an individual. Be the walrus. Right? Be
yeah,
the walrus.
be the walrus. I could be with the walrus. I'd still have the bum rides off people. And yeah, you're
Oh
right. I mean,
man.
the car is obviously like so important to this film. You know, we'll get into this even more, but like right from the beginning, this is like a central antagonism for Ferris, right? Of like, I don't have a car, you know. It never mind the fact that his parents bought him a computer, which in the 80s is a huge, like no kid had a fucking personal computer in the 80s. Like your family might have a Commodore 64, but like
Dude,
nobody had.
the dude also has an MU modulator. And if
Yeah,
anyone knows freaking beat machines of the 80s, first of all, they were hard to find. Probably around that time, I don't think you were getting one of those for under $1,500, right? $1,500 in 1986 five money, right? This is like a premium new model of thing that has to be shipped to you, or you have to go somewhere in Chicago, nowhere to get it, and drive it all the way back. Like, no, he has like state of the art audio equipment. The dude's room is at least 10 grand.
at
Like,
least,
at
at
least.
least. Yeah,
Like, someone made a comment. I was like, he could have traded in his emu for a car.
easily could have got a car. Easily, like the stuff that he has, easily could have sold some of his stuff and just gone and bought a car. Like just a computer alone in that era, like you could just sell the computer and buy a used car. Like it that the it's not, you know, it's not like nowadays. Anyway, it's just important to say that, yeah, and like the synthesizer you're talking about, the emu that he has, and there's just like all of these, he also has all of this audio equipment in his room, right? Like, and it's very advanced stuff. It's not even just like low level, you know, it's high end stuff. Um, so yeah, so he has all of that. But the car is, I mean, it does symbolize, right, this the mobility, the freedom, because otherwise he's stuck in his room playing with his shit. He's playing his stupid clarinet that he doesn't know how to play. He's fucking around with the synths. He's making, you know, he records himself, which is interesting. I mean, Hughes was fascinated with like recording technology and stuff like that. Like in Home Alone, you know, remember he has, especially two, he has the like talk boy thing where, you know, Kevin McAllister can record his own voice and play it back and all of that, change the, you know, the speed to you know, raise the tone of his voice or lower it, make himself sound older and stuff like that. And so Hughes has this interesting um fascination. I mean, it probably is connected to consumerism and capitalism and everything else, with like certain technologies and putting those in films and all of that. um but he's also and we get this a lot in this film, like, he really likes gags. He really likes these, like, tricking people. The idea of kids getting something over on adults is a big thing for him. And it's not just in this film, it's in a lot of his other work as well. But it's kind of part of his sense of humor, I think, for him, and one of the techniques he likes to use in films. So you get this scene, and then basically he's trying to get Cameron, who he knows is like going through a real crisis. Um, Also is homesick, and he knows that he will be. Is depressed, basically, I would describe it, and like having real, I think, existential kind of teen shit going on, which I don't want to downplay either, that these are real things that like teenagers go through, and teenage life and high school life is very difficult. It was difficult for me. I see it with my son in terms of like how it impacts his mood and everything else. Like, this is real stuff. But it's interesting in the film because it's like, is really a way within this film that it just makes us focused on these like problems of these very elite, wealthy, affluent white kids in, one of the most, these kids are set. Like their lives are like totally set for them. They could do all kinds of things, right? And what you get worried about are like their own personal stuff of like Ferris needing a car, or, Cameron struggling with his issues with his parents and stuff like that. And it's not that those are, well, the car thing is just like, who gives a shit? But like the
Mhm.
Cameron stuff is more real, but it's still like, you know, I don't know, in the grand scheme of social problems that could be examined in film, right? Like, it's not very high up on the list for me. But yeah.
I mean, so it's interesting because Cameron as a figure in film, I think, becomes a kind of like archetype, a beloved archetype for a certain kind of like sad, depressed teen, right? And um he enters this space of being something that we should all kind of emotionally center and rally around, which is what they kind of try to make the movie about, because like Ferris is like calling his friend to give him a good day. A big thing about the film is like Ferris wants to show Cameron that life is can be nice, right? Now, Ferris could be naive or whatever like that, so forth and so on, but they use Cameron in a way to make Ferris's, skipping school, defying his parents, defying authority as a net positive because of how he is looking towards Cameron, right? Now, one of the funny things about Cameron that I find is how he's introduced, because that first shot you get is literally, I mean, his house, it's like in the fucking woods on stilts. Look, I've been to a few places like that in my life, on some the weird travels of my life, and anyone that I know who has money like the camera, that's dough. Like that's cash, right? Like you ain't having out that without like real cash. So to kind of start that and then enter into like Cameron, right? As the kind of like person you should center yourself for, it does a job on you. Not saying that these problems aren't real, but it's obfuscating the kind of totality of how a Cameron is developed, right? The other interesting thing is that it's what it's cross-cut with. So you get the scene where Ferris leaves the shower. You go into Ben Stein doing his Bueller, right? And when they do it, the teens' faces in school are just like, so Hughes knows what he's doing. He doesn't want you to like question that school's a good place. He wants it to be like definitive that school fucking sucks, right? Everybody with intelligence here and authority, they're either like boring, they're not reaching anybody, or they're like Rooney, who you'll see in a little bit, who's a complete, military authoritarian, right? A totalitarian like nut job, right? And then you cut that to Cameron, right, in bed. It's like you you can't help but make that juxtaposition as also school is part of the reason why Cameron is also this way, right? And all of the kids. And it becomes this really like just yeah, I mean, look at that crib. Look at that crib. Look at that crib. Right? Like that's a crib. But it becomes this weird kind
This
of
is
like
just the
reductive
garage, by
defense.
the way. This is the
So that
garage. I just
so that means he has a compound, right? Like that's what I thought about it too when I was watching the movie again. I was like, wait a minute. So he has like a couple of those. Dude lives on a compound. That is probably Cameron's part of the compound that he lives in. Right? Like what the fuck, dude? You know
yeah,
what I'm saying?
it's called a Ben Ross house is the actual like style. Like I looked it up because I was like, is it Frank Lloyd Wright? Because it's like kind of has that like, but it's not. It's Ben Ross, but it's like this very very high end mid century modern architecture,
Yeah,
whatever.
his
But yeah,
pops has land. He doesn't have a home. His pops got land. You know what I'm saying? Like acres, probably not acres, but like a lot of land, right? But yeah, I mean, so like the whole thing, it's like a bit of a setup because then on the back end of it, right? You get like so Ferris is explaining, why he needs to basically like, help Cameron out, you know, like he needs to do this good deed, right? And then you get Rooney on the back end of it calling Ferris's mom, right? And basically to do the whole Ferris has missed school 9 times, right? So when they bring in Rooney, right, like, it's I mean, two things stick out to me. First, you see the shot of like where Ferris's mom works, which is like a real estate agent. It's like has like at least a corner of the block, right? So she has a real estate agency. She's made to look like, if not the boss, one of the bosses or one of the high people there, right? And then you juxtapose that with her talking to Rooney, right? And he's basically telling her, that your son has missed 9 times. And of course, like mom is like none the wiser. I will say though, shout out to Edie McClurg. I think she's hilarious always. She's the assistant to him. She's always funny as shit to me. I like her little her little sequences. They definitely make her kind of like the dumb, but she's just really sharp. Her lines are just really sharp when she's going with him. But yeah, so like I mean, the Rooney thing is interesting to me because this is where you also see another kind of, I think Jay was already alluding to it. You see the other kind of strand of what I think Hughes would think is a kind of like anti-establishment kind of attitude, which I think makes him think he's like slightly rebellious, but it also kind of like exposes his like libertarian. I mean, I always feel like he has a very chaotic kind of ideology, right? It's a chaotic, which is a lot of liberalism, right? It's where you can kind of pick and choose where you want things because he immediately makes Rooney into basically like an authoritarian cop. Like he doesn't want to like his thing with Ferris is not that he missed 9 times, is that Ferris is getting over on him and getting over on society. He's similar to we haven't done the Breakfast Club. He's similar to, probably in a more comedic way, he's similar to the who was it? Was he a principal in the Breakfast Club? The guy who basically watches them. He's like a dean or something like that. I can't remember what it is.
yeah. Rooney is a dean. I don't remember
Maybe that guy's a
in
dean
the
also,
Breakfast Club.
actually. I think the
Probably,
guy's a,
yeah.
yeah, so I think these kinds of people who are not like the top, right? They're kind of like their job is to kind of run in the kids. But if you remember in the Breakfast Club, there's this big conversation where he says, like, these are the people who are going to be running our society, right?
Hmm.
And we need to get them in shape. And this is the kind of Rooney's thing. He's like, he needs to catch Ferris because Ferris is part of like the dregs of society, right? So it's like it's like he's doing it for the culture, for the society, but also because like he's fucking him over eventually too. So he really wants to kind of situate this whole thing as like, it has more to do with a kind of like authoritarian angry, unprincipled streak. And look, I'm not saying there aren't those people in schools. Trust me. I'm not saying there's no people in schools, but the critique that Hughes is going for, I think, going to go back to Jay is I think it has more to do with how generally Hughes envisions this part of society as something that really doesn't work. And honestly, it's like a libertarian thing. Let the great people be great. Let Ferris be great, right? Ferris will figure it out. He'll and by trickle down, he'll let Cameron's life come up. Sloan will be better. You know, even by proxy, his sister will even realize it at the end of the movie, right? And you know, like it's I mean, it doesn't really make any sense to me. Like you try to like actually find a logic with it, but it doesn't really have one. But you can clearly see how he situates someone like Rooney and he sees these people as insufficient. They're ruining our young people and we should if they get over on, we should celebrate it.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is one of the appeals to me of the film, honestly. Like, um, especially growing up, right? Like, because I just hated I don't think I ever had well, maybe when I got to high school, I had a principal that, I was fine with, right? And by that point, yeah, it was just like the deans or whatever else that you dealt with. Um, the but who really likes these authority figures in schools? Like I think that's something that your teachers like they can be more nurturing and this and that, but it I do think, and maybe, I mean, I don't know how much my view of this was structured by films like this, but it always just felt like you wanted to stay away from the principal's office, you wanted to stay away from the dean, and they were like just always out to get people in trouble, basically. And so obviously Rooney takes it to like an extreme level that is just totally unhinged in the film. But like the fact one of the things that I liked about the film as a kid, right, is like I think it appropriately diagnoses a kind of villain from the perspective of a lot of like middle school, high school kids, right? Like who likes the fucking dean? Like that guy's always going around trying to get people in trouble for having fun, right? And so there is that kind of um aspect to it that I think does again speak to something that kids experience within school, which is like that a lot of these authority figures take their jobs too way too fucking seriously and are not like I did have experiences with some deans and stuff like that who were more compassionate people actually and actually could understood that like their job, their role was to kind of do what he says, right? Is like sort of manage this population and set young people on the right track and make sure that they're not, too far out of bounds of what's like socially acceptable and all this kind of stuff. Like, I mean, it's weird to talk about in these things in this sense, but that is really how these jobs are set up, right? Is like to kind of prepare you for society, right? And if you're too unwilling to it's the same kind of management that you get around law enforcement and policing, right, around laziness and um all of these different things, right? Like, and so there are ways that this is kind of messed up, but that also all comes out of capitalism, right? It all comes from like we need to funnel people into productive labor, right? So that their wages can be properly exploited. Um, and it is interesting on a class level because I think particularly for affluent communities, there probably is some kind of understanding of like, is this really necessary for us? Right? Like, go do that with these lower class, like dregs of society, right? Who really need to be managed in certain ways, really need to be cultivated. But we're all set. Like, we've got wealth, we've got two-parent households here, like this and that, right? This kind of like view of things. And I think that that's ideologically where he's approaching it that would be different than a lot of us, which I think did have issues with people like Rooney, in our lives. And we all know like the kind of cop behavior, right? Of like police who just It's like, seriously, dude, like you gotta harass everybody, you know, but like it's all dealt with in a very specific way and in a very cartoonish way. I mean, the idea of a dean, I don't know if anybody ever experienced anything like this. I'd be curious. I did hear about deans like maybe trying to do home visits and stuff like that. But like the idea of a dean like spending his whole day like trying to find Ferris Bueller through the streets of Chicago, right? To like nail him. Obviously, is
Yeah.
taking it to this like very extreme level, you know.
So there is also a conversation amongst the affluent who live in this kind of idea that they've made their own money, that their kids are lazy. And I think this also contributes to that too, because the argument then becomes between, was it the institutions that made our kids lazy or was it our parenting? And the argument that kind of happens between the two of them is everyone says it's the other. So the institution will say it's you parents who don't know how to discipline your kids. You gave them everything that they wanted when they were 4 or 5. This is why they won't run your law firms. You'll get someone else to do it, right? They don't have the skills. The opposite is the parents will say, no, we sent it to schools. You basically didn't do shit. You're supposed to, we're working all day making millions of dollars and all this type of shit to keep, society high and make sure that we can pay your tuition fees and so forth and so on. It's your fault that the institutions haven't basically stepped up to the task of reproducing the greatness that we are. They're both idiots and they're both disgusting type of mentalities. But I think you're starting to see the entry. I mean, I think the beginning of the entry of this is actually Ordinary People in 80, when you have about about depression and kid depression and the parents not being able to acknowledge it and like hiding that the kid was going to therapy. That's a very serious movie, but I think once you kind of situate that in like 80, you get this kind of like intra-class conversation about it. And Hughes likes to dive right into it on his own kind of chaotic terms. And I think this is like another entry into it, right? Where I think he probably puts blame on both a bit. Like he probably has a bit more affection for the parents, right? He definitely does not like the institutions, right? And then he sometimes gets over on like probably in other movies he'll get angry at like the bosses, right? Like Plane, Trains, and Automobiles, like he'll say some shit about like Steve Martin's boss for basically making his life hard to a certain degree, right? But this is also part of like this kind of weird intra like class thing, because then he really goes back into the institution. This is when you get like the Ben Stein moment when he's doing his, which I found out, I didn't know that this was improvised. It's basically like Ben Stein, because he studied economics, his voodoo economic sequence. They basically said like, hey dude, could you just give like an economic speech? And he basically started doing it. He didn't think it would actually make it. They thought they were going to only get they were doing it to basically get like the shots of the students like reacting, and they're all like on the floor. The best one is the kid with the 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 drool on like the table and things like that. But he improvised it and they ended up keeping it. And he said he was like, oh wow, it was like, it ended up becoming a very like famous scene for him. Weird ass career, as people have mentioned. But yeah, like I mean, and the whole movie becomes this dive into that, because then like you're just seeing the kind of social world that exists because of this kind of like messy society that we have, right? Oh, that he had, that they see, right? Because I think like the next sequence kind of after that is like you see like Jeannie in school, and they do a lot of cross cutting. So like you'll get like Jeannie in school, like a girl comes in basically, how's your brother doing? Right. And you had like Christy Swanson in one of her little cameos basically saying, she heard Ferris like passed out somewhere. Right. So like the rumor mill begins to come, which I can't lie, that is something that really would happen. Like I remember there was a kid who missed like a couple of days once, and man, the rumor mill, like this, like all types of shit. And the kid just came back and was like, me and my mom had to go to like Florida for some shit, like all types of shit. Like the kid got kidnapped. It was like so much. But I also wonder, like, do movies like this, do they do they jumpstart this kind of activity, or they are reflective, or is it a little bit of both?
I definitely think it's a little bit of both. But I do think that there's just a lot within the film when you watch it again of like this wouldn't happen now because like high school kids are in freaking Discord chat groups with each other and stuff like so it's like a totally different style of teen behavior that happens now that is mediated and mediated through technology but also connected in certain ways through technology that's just very different. It's not better. It's actually like very toxic in its own ways, and it's full of all kinds of like cyberbullying and all kinds of weird stuff. But and like addiction to screens and stuff like that. But I do think that it's interesting in some ways because there's a lot within this film where you watch and you say like, yeah, that type of stuff did absolutely happen in the 80s and in the 90s and even like the early 2000s, but it wouldn't happen anymore because technology is to such a extent that like that kind of it's actually closest if you like elementary school life is like somewhat like this still because most of the kids at that age are not they're not all on the same things. And so there is a little bit of a space too where they sometimes have like these kind of outlandish ideas about what's going on with each other. But yeah, it's high school is fundamentally different in that respect of yeah, but it's hilarious. I mean, all this stuff, like the Save Ferris stuff, a whole band. There's like a punk ska band in the '90s called Save Ferris that takes their stuff from the movie. I mean, that's the thing about the cultural impact of this film, right? Like a popular band too, not even just like some, you know, whatever. Like they had hits. But anyway,
Yeah, and then the big thing they want to do is like Ferris is like kind of like controlling the narrative. So he's like on the phone, like on like a
yeah,
payphone in school, which is like, God, that's like another thing. But like, I was like, wow, yeah, payphone in school, right? He's like talking to like a couple of like young dudes, and the other thing they want to show is like Ferris. What he does is to curry favor with people is he gets them out of things. So it's like he's gonna let he's basically gonna help one student, like, right with landlines. Um, um, is like helping a student, like I think, like pass a class that he's basically, he can't get
you
through.
get out of. I think one of that, and then another one, get out of summer school. Like,
Got a
yeah,
summer school, right? Which like is kind of suggesting because you see it earlier is that we didn't mention is that Ferris is able to kind of reduce the number of days
so this is like that particular thing is
on his
so
list.
interesting. We just gotta spend a moment with that because this
Yeah.
is what 86. When does War Games come out before or after this film? Before, right?
And they say it's a
Yeah.
direct reference to war games.
Yeah, I mean it feels that way for sure. Um, but what's fascinating within that, obviously, is that like not only does he have a personal computer, but this is a suggestion that somehow his computer is networked and that it's networked in I mean, it's absurd. Like, I don't think there's actually nobody that I'm aware of like had that technology in the 80s. I mean, the internet doesn't become a thing that like regular people get until like 93, 94. So like this is actually a reference that um yeah, is interesting that way. I mean, I think it is just a war games thing, but so
Yeah,
what he's able to do
and
is
weird
to hack
science
in.
too.
Yeah.
And weird
Yeah.
science was too. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's able to hack into the to Rooney's computer, right, or to the database, the student information database, and to change his absences. And this happens while Rooney's on the phone with his mom. His mom's like, "Sorry, I forgot to call in, his absence, whatever." He's like, "Do you realize he's been absent 9 times?" Right? And then there's this whole back and forth around it. But as he's saying it, the number starts to go down and he starts yelling at Grace, the secretary, right? Like to figure out what's going on. But like Bueller takes it all the way from 9 down to 2. And so yeah, like you said, he has this ability to hack in and to change things within the student information database, which is presumably how he's helping these other kids, with their grades and other stuff. But it's fascinating in that respect to a certain degree because promoting that idea and like promoting the hacker and the internet in an era before these things are actually accessible on a consumer level is an interesting little moment within the film.
I think it also helps stoke like I think in the 80s, a lot of these parents were having these like little fears that their kids knew things that they didn't know because like the parents were so unless they worked in it, they were technologically not intelligent, right? So this idea that their kids were doing things that they couldn't do themselves or access. So I think it helps play upon that kind of fear in like a comedic way. And I think it's why it could be sold because like there's always these rumors that your kids are doing the 80s was big on your kids, that thing your kids are doing that you don't know anything about. Expose on, 2020 or some shit like that, right? And like it 9 times out of 10, it's kind of bullshit. Or like for this one, it's just used for in a movie. But I think this like whiz kid attitude thing, this whiz kid kind of mentality thing is something that they really wanted to, pump up about their kids. Which I think also helps elevate their kids being more special than they actually fucking were.
So one thing on this too, though, like even with dial up, like, and I get it, but like the first commercially available dial up was in 89 as far as I can like tell. So I'm curious. I mean, this is genuinely a place where I don't know definitively some of this, but I don't believe that what he's doing in 86 in a film that's probably filmed in like 85 is actually something that was commercially accessible even as dial up. So anyway, but that's another a point to delve into with technologists later on. I know Steven works in that realm. So but
Mhm.
yeah, anyway. So that it is, I agree. And one interesting thing, I do want to say something about Hughes too that I learned that I hadn't actually followed. I don't remember if we mentioned this with planes, trains, and automobiles. You might have, but he comes out of advertising. So I think this is an interesting thing with Hughes is he's in advertising for 10 years and works his way very high up in it. He ends up becoming the creative director for Leo Burnett, which is a big advertising agency based in Chicago. Um, it, some of its clients include, like I guess Pillsbury Doughboy. It comes out of that. Yeah, so the Pillsbury Doughboy, Charlie the Tuna, Green Giant, right? McDonald's, I guess, worked with Leo Burnett at a certain point. Um, and Philip Morris, right? So there's like all of these different connections. It's a big, big ad agency. And if we remember, like, so Ferris's father in this is works in advertising at a high level, and also Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is about advertise. Steve Martin's character there is in advertising. And so that's something that comes up again. But I think it's important to say because this film is so heavy on pushing like commercial stuff and maybe here either even like it's building the like we know that this technology is not yet available to people but it will be within a few years and so we want to also kind of have these war games plus um this movie and others that are kind of showing people in the 80s like because obviously it existed it just wasn't available to average consumers at this point but anyway.
I mean, that would make sense, like even him having the emu in it. I'm actually trying to look at emu was I gotta find out where emu was from, but like that's like something that you would only really know about unless you're in like certain sectors of technology and things like that, like boutique, like a sharper image. I think is like the 90s, right? I don't think it was in the 80s. People remember that store. It was like the store where you would get like really like boutique like gadgety type things. So types of laser disc players or different types of bullshitly made things that were made to be like futuristic, but then like people stopped using in like a week, right? So, but I think it could be part of it, like these like boutique things that were trying to like promote themselves, and I'm sure he was having a lot of conversations, with that type of shit. So yeah, definitely, I could totally see that as like part of the aims of him. So the movie kind of like it's like dialing itself together to kind of like get everything together. he's trying to like pressure Cameron to kind of get out the house, and he's like putting that on. Cameron's like doing all this like, I hate Ferris and why does he bother me, da, 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 and trying to like, he's sitting in his car. And then the next thing they do is kind of like bring in Sloane right to it. And you see Sloane in her class, right? And she's listening to like another teacher who's like talking, and they make him very stuffy. No one seems to be interested. And you get this sense early that Sloane knows she's gonna get like out of it. Like she's like sitting there kind of waiting, right? Like like she puts her like the woman comes in, right? And then like the nurse comes in to come get her, and like Sloane puts on her coat, like she's ready to be out, right? And there's like this story about, her grandmother has died and whatnot. And like that's the reason why she's being pulled out of class and, bringing her over. Well, then they cut to Rooney, and Grace comes over to tell him that, Sloane is going to be gone because her grandmother died, right? And they put it together that she's been seen around with Ferris Bueller, and Rooney immediately is like, this is some bullshit, right? Like, I've caught him, right? Um so then they start the whole, which is kind of like a famous sequence of calling of well, he's like, well, I want you to call Mr. Peterson, which is Sloane's last name. But then of course it is Mr. Peterson on the phone, which of course, Rooney does not believe is right. And it's the voice, right? It's like the voice on the phone. It's like, oh, Mr. Peterson, and he's talking to him, and Rooney's like, this is some bullshit, right? And he starts, really start leveling into it. Like giving him all this stuff, like, like really crass, like requests and all that. But then, of course, because Ferris was listening to the conversation, because he thinks it's Ferris on the phone, they cross another call in, and Ferris calls Grace basically to says, I'm going to be sick. I like my assignments. And then they have the shot, where basically she's like, Ferris Bueller online too. And then, he now thinks it's Peterson, but it really is Cameron, right? And that's the whole big elaborate kind of scheme to kind of get Sloane out. So like that's like the big famous like cross, And the thing about that, I think it kind of goes back to like even to like the internet stuff is like Hughes is really fascinated. I somewhat liken it to, but in a different way, to Kubrick's fascination with like the lead character in Clockwork Orange, because like I think he's fascinated by the kind of trickery that this younger generation can do, and he celebrates it because he does not like these authoritarian figures. So while what they're doing is like really getting over, it's not doing anything meaningful for the world. It's like showing this like great potentiality to like basically, do some really dope shit. Like they could cross phones, they get technology. Everyone is just so fucking stupid up there. Like they could be got like that, right? It's not, they don't even have to break a sweat. Because the other thing about them, about Cameron, like if you think about the 80s, we're watching things like Red Dawn, people with guns and shit. They're like the most unphysical heroes I've ever seen. Like except for Ferris running at the end to try to get back home, these motherfuckers is lazy. Like they barely move. They sit in cars, right? They cross phones and things like that. They're like the most unphysical kind of people, but yet they're sharp. They're on it, they're tech, like they're early tech bros, right? And it's that celebration, I think, of this like new kind of class that's growing, and Hughes likes it. He really likes it. He thinks it's like something we should really kind of get behind as like the new kind of generation, because the Rooneys will tell you these people are horrible and they suck and they're going to ruin society.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting kind of like the kind of good, bad. It's like there's a sort of techno determinism within it. There's a kind of a fetishization of these technologies. And obviously, again, I think it's part of why I brought in marketing is like a lot of these things. By the way, I stand corrected. So I guess the Commodore 64 did have a modem, and it could only connect like modem to modem at the time. There wasn't like the big, I guess that's the difference, is there wasn't like the World Wide Web, right? In the way that we think about in the 90s, right? Um, but the but anyways, you could do some things connecting network wise from modem to modem or whatever. And but these would have been like very elite things, like definitely something that I did not know a single person until the 90s that had anything like this. And even, you know, like answering machines, which get used a lot in the film too, that was fairly new technology, fairly high end in this period as well. Like my family didn't, my parents had a thing against answering machines for a long time, but like you know, we didn't have one for most of my childhood, even though they were available. But I didn't know people who had them, particularly like in the 80s, right? And so again, these are products that are coming into market that are being promoted through these films. Also, as people have pointed out, it's a big deal that he had two lines, right? Because in order to pull off this prank, and that's a lot of thing, is a lot of prank phone calling was a big thing in the 80s and the 90s, right? Like there's the whole, Jerky Boys. I don't know if people remember that, but like, there was like, God, I sound like I'm talking from the fucking Stone Ages right now. You would buy a CD, this compact disc of things, right? And it would be comedians doing prank phone calls, and you would listen to it and laugh at it over and over again. But this was a big deal, and people would play on the phones in this kind of way, and you could, push a certain prefix to block your number as you were like calling out to people so that then they couldn't trace the phone call back to you, and you'd make prank phone calls, right? And it was a part of like adolescent foolishness and this kind of stuff that they're doing. The voices are hilarious to me because I'm like, this does not sound like a real human being. Like, why do you sound like a 1930s, like, I don't know what that accent is, right?
He
Like,
got it from an actor because Ruck did Biloxi Blues on Broadway, and it was his impersonation of an actor. So like even then, but he said it was never meant to be a real impersonation, like an actual kind of voice. It was like how he was making fun of how an actor talked. So like even that, yeah, like yeah. I just wanted to throw that in there. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's funny, you know, those scenes were a big deal and a big part of the appeal of the movie for us, I think, as kids, is just like, oh, the kids are getting over and embarrassing these adults. And, you know, Rooney obviously thinks now that he has insulted Mr. Peterson in this like deep way, because he tells him like kiss his ass and all this stuff, right? And he also
Produce
told
the
him like
body. You have to
produce a
produce the
corpse.
body.
Yeah. In order to get Sloane out, right? Because the idea is that Sloane's being let out because
Yeah.
her grandmother has died or whatever. And
Yeah.
so then, yeah, there's the whole thing where Ferris gets a bit mad at Cameron because Cameron's like, just let her out all by herself. And he's like, that's too obvious. And then he says, okay, you be out there with her. And now Ferris is pissed because now he's going to have to like be eye to eye or whatever to Rooney. And so anyways, because I think he says at first, I want to give you a piece of my mind, right? When I see you. And then he's like, oh, second thought, we'll do lunch. I'm too busy, right? And so then, they come out, and there's this scene, this really awkward scene, because Rooney is running down the hallway, but then he like stops to walk every time he goes by a classroom, right? So that the
Yeah.
kids won't see him running like an idiot trying to get to Sloane. And he gets her, and then he does all this like silly kind of speech about like the fragility of life and more, and it's just terrible stuff, right? But she's playing along with this. And then the other thing, we actually have to go away for a second
To
because
the
there's the whole
car.
thing about the car. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's what we get to, but yeah, the car thing.
Yeah, so like Ferris also uses this as a reason to get the car from Cameron, right? Which Cameron's dad has a 61 Ferrari with 6 which sits in a garage. It's never driven. I think Cameron mentions that the dad fixed it up. So there's like a, which kind of goes into like a long play that he loves the car more than his son, which is like a really big cliche writing trope, right? The object, love the object more than your children. I'm not saying these things don't exist, but it's just a cliche of writing, especially when you're not going to actually show the father ever as a character. You like displace it, you create this kind of really simplistic structure for it. It's to me it's silly as a writing thing. It's very convenient and you can just use it. It can just have an infinite amount of mileage in like creating story. So, you know, um Ferris, like, kind of like tricks, he kind of like emotionally tricks Cameron into basically taking the car, right? Cameron's first thing is, well, he asked him about how many miles are on it, and Cameron knows the miles, right? And
And it's
then,
like 116 or something like that. So
yeah,
his father literally never drives
never
the thing.
drives
Yeah.
it, right? Right. It probably was on there before he got the fucking car, right? And then, Ferris's solution to basically taking them for the miles to not be seen is that they'll drive the car backwards, which is it.
Even as like a 6-year-old, I was like, that doesn't work, does it,
Like, that
Dad? And they're
doesn't
like, no.
like, no, like it doesn't make any sense. It's like, yeah, that's not how miles work, but okay, cook, you know. Um, so yeah, and then basically fair. I mean, and you get this. I mean, the one thing I do want to say about this part, and this is where I have like maybe sympathy for a Cameron, because what I don't also like about the movie is I know friendships like this where a person is a bit of a pushover and the other friend is able to consistently push them over to doing things. And there's a way in this movie they basically make Ferris's manipulation of Cameron, while slightly unprincipled, ultimately for the greater good of Cameron. And that's bullshit, man. That's just bullshit. That's a really awful way to situate a relationship, right? It's so bad, right? And I
Yeah.
actually have to say I've always felt like that. I think within the once I had a certain level of consciousness, I've always felt that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's all there's like these online. This is where we get there's like weird fan theory stuff about this too. Of like Ferris doesn't actually exist. It's a fiction of Cameron's. Um, the Cameron's the real hero of the story. Ferris is a fiction of his imagination that he needs in order to get himself out of his own like life crises and back on the right track and stuff. It's just heinous bullshit and doesn't even make any sense, right? Because like there's so many things that interact with Ferris that have nothing to do with Cameron as also. It's not like a kind of, they liken it to the Tyler Durden scenario in Fight Club, but like if you actually follow that within Fight Club, I'm not saying there's no inconsistency in it whatsoever, but there's a way that you can make it work within the film to some extent. It doesn't actually work in this film. Um,
I mean, it totally
but
erases Jeannie. Like she
right,
becomes a nothing character.
Genie, his parents, like there's just all of this stuff that doesn't work within that context. Sloane, like there's just a lot to it. Bruni, like it, whatever. But the point being that um I mean the theory I brought it up because it touches on this kind of point that you're making, right? Which is that there's an argument that all of Ferris's stuff, all of his manipulation, ultimately he's still altruistic in a certain way. Like he's still doing this legitimately for somebody else's benefit. And like that's just not true. And it's not true of deeply manipulative people like this, right? They don't do things for the benefit of others around them in that kind of way, right? Like it is actually and I've had experiences where I've been manipulated by people in this kind of way too, and like it's fucking awful. Like you're saying this, I'm still mad at somebody from my 20s who did some shit to me. You know what I mean? Like it's terrible, So like Yeah, I agree in terms of that being one of the really kind of sinister things. Like Ferris ultimately in all of this film, he isn't a villain. Like he gets to be the hero through all of his bullshit. And he manipulated Cameron by saying that because Cameron made this like minor gaffe basically around how the pickup is going to be, that George Peterson wouldn't drive your piece of shit car, Cameron. So we have to drive your father's Ferrari. And he's like, it's not a piece of shit. He's like, it is a piece of shit, but I still have to envy it because I don't even have a piece of shit. Right. So it's like that's, and that's a kind of thing with Ferris too, of the way he like, you know, there's a whole trend of like weird relationship stuff that happened in like the 2000s around like negging, right? Like saying negative shit about other people to make them feel lesser, but it will somehow benefit you, right? It's this very manipulative, like kind of psychological stuff. And that's kind of what, Ferris does is like, constantly like when he wants something out of Cameron or out of somebody, he's very toxic and manipulative to make Cameron be like, okay, like I'll go along with it. And he's like that with other people too, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so they get the car and they go pick up, and like there's like this you get the shot that like really annoyed me this time watching it of like the school bus. So like there's like the shot is kind of like a low angle, and you see Sloane and Rooney waiting for Peterson, right? The school bus goes, right? And then like once the school bus like leaves, the Ferrari's there and Ferris is like, standing right in front of it. You hear the from the Oh Yeah song, right? Like he's meant to be looking like a fucking like fucking not James Bond. It's more, I mean, it's kind of like a Bond, but more like a Sherlock Holmesy like Bond. Like he's like he has abilities which I think feed into like the float scene later. He has abilities that are actually unexplained. Like
Yeah.
he Ferris does get metaphysical at a couple of times in the movie, right? There is this suggestion that he's a little bit higher above anything that we can comprehend.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to point out because I think this is actually where like the theory stuff starts to come in is because people can't rationalize certain things within the film that actually are beyond what is rational, right? Like the Rooney would see him and be like, "That's Ferris Bueller in a hat and a pair of glasses," right? It's like kind of the Superman of like I take off the glasses and I move my hair slightly, my slick goes a different way and suddenly nobody can recognize me. It does have that. And then Sloane comes down and they start like making out in front of Rooney and he's like, "Oh, I guess their family's like that," right? And so I mean obviously Rooney is supposed to be just a total idiot in certain respects in this way. But yeah, I mean these are the points of the film that definitely strain credulity.
Yeah, it definitely begins to also, I think, maybe like plant like even if a subconscious seed that something else is going on, because then Rooney a little bit later will then try to like keep figuring out what's the real deal with Sloane. Is her grandmother really dead, so forth and so on, right? So from there you get basically like their drive into the city, right? And they're in the car and you go right into Chicago. You get like the kind of like montage of like the skyscrapers of Chicago. This is definitely Hughes wanting to do a big celebration of Chicago as like a prime American city, right? Which I think he's like wants is trying to announce it a bit. Like you definitely really feel that with like the music and so forth and so on. And it gets interesting because with for the we'll go through it, but for like the rest of the movie while they're in the city, he basically like selects like various like landmarks of Chicago, at least landmarks to him, right? Like the art museum, Wrigley, so forth and so on. One of these like high end restaurants, so people could like get a taste of like what is like the great Americana in for him. Like, and Chicago was like part of the great Americana. And it's funny because like, and I'm not doing this to get into any kind of what city is better than other wars. That's not my intention with this. I mean like for real. But there is this like thing that like I have these conversations. I remember back in the days with people where people would do these kind of like city comparisons, and like it would basically be like, what's the most American city and what's the city that like exemplifies. So someone would say New York for various reasons, and someone would say like maybe like LA, but then Chicago also gets put in there as having this kind of like everything. It has the like the business culture, the whatchamacallit, the kind of like arts culture with like the art institute, but also like, Wrigley Field, these like very American things that kind of separate it. And I mean, I don't think he really makes a great argument for why it's great. He just shows a bunch of shit and puts them in it. It's kind of stupid. But I do think it's like part of like that entry um of like Chicago is the best American city, man, right? It's just very American, kind of dry obsessions, really what it is. I mean, he has the kind of most cliche obsessions about like, claiming Americanness. It's kind of fucking boring, to be honest with you.
I mean, I think it again, like the advertising point, I think is worth like it's like a tourist ad for Chicago, and I think he called it at some point like kind of a love letter to his own,
He did.
his city, and like how he grew up. The college or the high school that's in it, I think, is like a performing arts high school that I believe he went to. I'm not positive about that, but it does have like a performing arts connection. Um, and the first place that they go is the Sears Tower, right? Which is the dialogue of that scene was hilarious to me. Um, Cameron goes, "Ferris, do you think the car's all right?" "Sure. This is the tallest building in the world." "Ferris, I don't feel too good. Can we leave soon?" "Here, climb up on this." He stands on the railing to lean against the window. They're on the top floor of the Sears Tower, and they look straight down. So like they put their head against the glass to like look straight down. Which first of all, I'm like, that I would never do that, but I'm also afraid of heights. And he's like, "Come on, everybody, Cameron." And Salone's like, "It's so peaceful. Everything looks peaceful from 1,353 feet." And then Cameron, "I think I see my dad." He's down there trying to catch me or whatever. So it's like, I don't know. There's something so funny about that scene to me. I think it's just like Ferris's like obliviousness also to like he does not care at all. Like I mean, I guess the generous argument is like he's trying to get Cameron out of this kind of state because Cameron is in a very depressive, like sad, anxious kind of state. He wants to take the car back already. We did miss the scene. He drops off the car
We'll
at
go
the
to that in a minute.
garage.
We can
Yeah.
finish here, but we should go back to that. Yeah.
I mean, there's not much else to say about the Sears Tower scene. It has no purpose other than like you looking down and to like sell that like this is the tallest building in the world, and guess where it is? It's in Chicago in the United States. Like that's kind of the
And
whole point of it.
that was one of the other things that I would constantly hear. Chicago's the best city because it has the tallest building in the world, right? And that is how shallow Americans are, right? Like, oh.
And it was a thing in the 80s too. I remember people being like, "I want to go to Chicago to see the Sears Tower." Like this kind of, is this like
Sears.
yeah, is this fascination within American society, right? Around like, and I think again, it's like it is a Cold War thing of like, we're the best because we have the tallest building in the world. And like, it used to be the Empire State Building, but now, and then the second and third of the Twin Towers, right? In this period, but the Sears Tower is now the tall. And this was like yeah, it's so silly, but this was a thing in the 80s. Like kids would talk about this kind of stuff. I remember these conversations.
Oh man. Yeah, so the scene kind of before that is when they drop off the car, right? Well, there's actually two scenes, but we'll talk about the drop off the car scene. So they drop off the car in a garage, right? And Cameron's like, "Nah," right? And perfectly straight up, on any level, you would not leave a Ferrari inside some regular ass garage, dude. In the middle of Chicago downtown, a Ferrari? Like no. Like, Cameron's instinct is completely regardless of how they racialize it in a moment in a weird ass way with one of the guys actually being Jewish, but we'll get into that in a minute, Richard Edson. But um but of course, you don't leave a fucking Ferrari in the middle of the city in a downtown garage. Cameron is not paranoid, he's smart.
Yeah. I mean, just the possibility it could get like slightly dinged up or anything, like it's just like no.
No, you don't
I
do
mean,
that.
yeah, I mean, and it is a funny thing too because it's like again, like it it is weird. Like I understand it in terms of Ferris wanting to drive it and how much he likes to drive it and this sort of thing. But like functionally, they leave it in a garage for the rest of the day and they take cabs everywhere. And the money is no object. And we'll talk about all the ways in which that's obvious in this film if it wasn't already. But like, there's really no reason why they couldn't have taken the car back to Cameron's house and then taken cabs or taken his car around to do all the other stuff that they do, right? Because they don't use the car, but it's just I guess it's for the plot device at the end of the film, really. Like, but anyways, it doesn't make like logical sense. And so yes, Cameron is right about this point.
So Ferris then, so they get out, right? And you see a guy come in, he's like the parking attendant, and he's like, oh, and the first thing that Ferris asks the guy is, do you speak English? And I think his response is something like, what kind of place do you think, where do you think we are, or something he says. Now, the interesting thing, because the actor Richard Edson, who's been in several things, he well, one of the movies we did, he's the younger brother um in Do the Right Thing. He's Pino, right? Richard Edson is Jewish, right? He's a Jewish actor. He's also he's also a musician, right? And but the one thing that was always weird about his career is he would do these like ethnically coded characters because like the thought by invoking that kind of line is I think is to make him probably like Latino or something like that, right? Yeah, give him the chain, put his hair back, like you give him the kind of like certain kind of cut, right? Um, he's in Platoon. I think Richard Edson. I think Richard is in Platoon very shortly too. He's in a lot of stuff, right? Um, and so he gets the car, right? And I think the way they also doubly are able to kind of like ethnically code it is they don't see it, right? They have it kind of happen in the deep focus in like the background is that a black man who's also one of the other people who work at the garage will jump in the car with him, and unbeknownst to the three of them, they take the Ferrari out for a joyride, you know, and that shit like I re- I think I always probably had a little bit of like, oh yeah, that's interesting, right? And then, but I think definitely when I was a teenager, I was like, oh, because I actually thought Richard Edson at that point was Latino. I thought he was. I was like, oh, they got the Latino guy and the black guy to do it, right? And then I find out like Edson is actually Jewish, so they kind of make him look Latino. Is this adds another layer of bullshit to it. So yeah, they lose the car, um, for this like joyride for these two like people, and it starts another kind of thread of like Hughes is when you go into the cities, there'll be these unsavory characters, things that he has in all of his movies, every single one of them.
Not just the cities though, right? Because he also has this thing against rural America too. Like I do,
Rural in the cities, yeah.
yeah, like there's definitely just very clear class politics within his stuff that I
I
don't
guess it's
know
like outside
how.
the suburbs, I guess, right? I guess essentially is if you leave the suburbs, whether you go to like the rural or the city, you're gonna encounter the most unsavory of characters.
Yeah, I still find it fascinating that he and John Candy were so close, because John Candy strikes me from everything that you hear about him as like such a like, you know, kind of working class man of the people, like very nice also to people who were of lower, not as fortunate as he was and all of that kind of stuff, right? And Hughes in all of his movies just like hates he just hates workers, right? Like that's another thing within the film, right? Is like you think about, and we'll get to I mean, we could probably go to it next. But anyways, there's that whole scene. I agree with you. It's messed up and it's not for much. It has a plot device obviously to add extra miles to the car, right? That's what they're doing. There's the funny scene that I love where there's like a cut at one point of the Star Wars song playing and them just fly. The car is like literally launched into the air, like flying. They're just having a blast driving this
Yeah,
car
I
around.
know.
Like there's a certain way in which, you know, maybe you could read it like maybe the most generous. I mean, obviously Ferris is a dick to them, and obviously he's kind of like racist or whatever. He's like, "Do you speak English?" I mean, this kind of anti-immigrant kind of, sentiment and all of this stuff. But like, there is a way in which they're maybe the only characters, or perhaps, yeah, it might be the only ones in the film that actually get something over on
Mhm.
Ferris in a certain way, um, and so they're, that would be like the most generous read of it, but nonetheless, they leave it. The next part I remember is the restaurant. Is that what comes like kind of after this?
Yeah, I mean, it does. You have mom going home and like being suspicious.
Yeah.
It's fine. You also have like Rooney calling the answering machines, and that's fine. Yeah, the next part is when they go to the really shishi restaurant, the French restaurant. I forget what the name of it is called, but they go there.
So yeah, I mean, just to say something quickly about the mom going home and the calling. I mean, yeah, it's more of this prank stuff. He has set up a mannequin in the bed with a pulley system, with a
Yeah,
trophy, and he's got a recording that plays
and the
on the
speaker.
yeah, on the through the synth to the speaker that sounds like him snoring. And when she opens the door, right, the body turns a little bit away from her, and like, this whole like elaborate thing, which is just kind of ridiculous, right? To be able to fool in case anybody goes in and checks on him. And the answering machines have been set up. Sloane's is like the mortuary, or maybe Cameron's is. They set them all up so that the various numbers that they give, to check in on things, right? It provides a little bit of a cover story for them, and all of this, I don't know, feels quite elaborate to me, but it's just for the gag of it, I think.
And it just adds to his cleverness, but also that his parents are also just stupid, right? Because then like Jeannie later will
Yeah.
like rush through the door and it just breaks. Like the minute it got like the like most simple amount of force, the whole thing like breaks apart, right? So the kids are smart, you know, everyone else is stupid. Um, so yeah, they go to this restaurant and there's I will say another thing that happened in the 80s and Hughes loves. Hughes does not like the French. Hughes has a thing with the French. If you remember, there's like a in European Vacation, one of the more kind of like real nasty sequences is with the French, with the translation. I mean, the French guy like literally says like things about like the daughter sexually, in the sequence. Like it's like really, he does not like the French. He has, yeah, it's like a big thing. So they go to the thing and like, Ferris tries this little slick thing where he like looks at the roster, the reservations to see who's there, and he what's his name? What's the Sausage King of Chicago's name in it? What is it?
Abe Froman.
Abe
So he looks,
Froman.
yeah, he looks at the registry, sees the name,
Yeah.
and he's like, yeah, Abe Froman, party of three or whatever for,
Yeah.
12 o'clock. And
And he's like, "You're Abe Froman." He's like, "Yes, I'm Abe Froman, the Sausage King of Chicago." Right? You know, and like he does the whole like they do a back and forth like, "Give me my table." He's like, "I don't believe you," right? And it becomes this back and forth. And Ferris, his whole thing is like, they're like, we want to go. Sloan and Cameron want to go. And this to me adds to also the whole thing of like certain authority figures, French being one of them in this thing where he goes, you know, I'm not going to let a guy like this, be the one to take me down. Right. So, like, it just shows this kind of like libertarian, like maybe old culture for this one, like older. Hey, I mean, you juxtapose that with I'm not European. So for like that, like the old society, fuck them. America, fuck yeah, we're the best, right? So he does another kind of phone thing where like he's gonna call the cops, right? He's able to kind of like trick it where he says if you use this phone right now, I'll say rat or something like that. It forces the guy to go back to get up another phone. The guy's too stupid to realize that he's already on his own line, right? And it's a woman, it's Sloan, right? Basically asking for Abe Froman, and she pretty much describes Ferris, right? I always thought that scene would have been. This is also another thing though, like in the writing, like it's to show you how much Hughes is in love with Ferris. There's like a perfect opportunity for Sloan to make a joke about like Ferris, like he's wearing a leather coat, looks like a fucking 15-year-old, but she could have totally made a joke, but she has to call him like ravishingly handsome.
Devastatingly handsome.
Devastatingly handsome, right? And like it just shows you like Hughes cannot stop his love affair with this fucker. Like he's so in love. Like it's perfect. The joke would have worked better, right? In that way, right? Like it would have worked better, but like he just couldn't get past his own like just really sappy love for this fucking character. Anyway, the guy comes back and he like seats them, right? There's also like the little bit where like the sergeant Peterson, they use the Peterson voice with Cameron, so forth and so on the other line, and they basically get sat down at this big French restaurant, right? And yeah, apparently the scene was much longer. Even watching it this time, it felt short. It felt a little weird and like inconsequential. But I mean, it's another thing they set up with it in a little bit after it, with like the dad also being there and a couple of other things they use it for. But yeah, it was apparently even a much longer scene with them ordering French food and hating it and all types of shit. It's like, more Hughes don't like the French.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like it's another like working person, right, that gets treated like an idiot and, all of this. And, yeah, the excuse, of course, is that he's French, but, it's pretty. But that's it. I mean, there's a very like, I don't know. Again, this is part of the conservatism of the film to me, too, is that there's, people remember post 9/11, like the whole like freedom fries, stuff of like because France wasn't as pro, US war in Iraq and everything else that, George Bush is like, we're going to stop calling French fries, this kind of stuff. Anyway, yeah, it's so the restaurant is called Chez Qui, I think is how it's pronounced. His father is there, as Mtume said. I think they're in the bathroom. Well, Ferris is doing a monologue in the bathroom. I don't really remember what the monologue was. I don't know if you remember the monologue,
The
Mtume.
car. It's about the car, about how much he
Right.
loves driving the car and like it's so choice. But then
Yeah.
it's another defense of doing this stuff for Cameron's benefit.
Right. If you have the means, I highly suggest picking one up. Like, it's just like ridiculous.
Fuck
like,
you.
who has the means to buy a 61 Ferrari, you fucker? But anyways, yeah, and his dad is in the stall as he's doing this monologue, which is like, again, I mean, it's a weird thing because it's like you don't really know. It doesn't matter. It's just a filmic thing. But, Ferris constantly breaks the fourth wall, as we've kind of already referenced, and has these direct conversations to the audience. And you don't really know whether the people who are around him as he's doing that, can they hear him? Is this actually happening? Right. It's sort of, anyway, but
yeah, I mean,
because his dad in theory would hear him, right?
Yeah, and I think another thing to add to that, which we didn't do, is the idea of the breaking the fourth wall will always give a character a certain kind of omnipotent power. And the fact that they do it literally right after the scene, he goes, they bought it, right? So because it basically situates the audience member as completely in on everything. Um, and that's partly why your brain is able to accept like logical fallacies that kind of happen within the movie because this person basically can manipulate time. I mean, he's Neo before Neo, really, in a way. He's like a, even some of the like timeline gaffes in the film, which we'll talk about in a minute, that just don't make any sense to me. And the ability to get from place to place and all the type of shit, the car reappearing, all that type of stuff that a device of talking to the screen does it because it's almost like his mental, he's able to get out of body and manipulate everything.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so as they're leaving, they're right outside and their father's like in the middle of like he's obviously been having an advertising meeting at lunch, right? And he's talking to these guys, he's trying to sell them on something, and they're trying to get in a cab. And then of course, like just Ferris, puts on a beret. I was trying to look up like what flag it had on it, but he puts on a do you
I thought
remember
is
that?
it I feel like I isn't it a Ferrari hat, but I could be wrong about that. Oh, you know what?
Well,
I am wrong about that. It isn't a Ferrari hat. I always thought it was a Ferrari hat, but it is a different. I'm looking at it right now. I don't know what it is actually. You're right.
we'll look it up in a sec. But
Yeah.
anyway, so he and Cameron and Sloan sneak into the very cab that they're trying to get into, and it drives off. And this is something that happens throughout the film, which is like he has all of these close encounters with his father, sometimes with his mother, and somehow they're never able to see him, even though he can see them and other people see them, and they're always kind of looking away at the wrong time. Again, it adds again to what you're talking about in terms of like his kind of omnipotence and like this kind of metaphysical supernatural abilities. I think PJ in the chat a while ago had said he was definitely like a superhero to us as kids, and like it gives him those sort of qualities.
I was trying to look up the hat thing, but I can't right now. So the
I
next
see.
part, so they get in the cab, right? Oh, you get Rooney going to the pizza shop, right? They have the detective music. So yeah, so Rooney has now like left the school. He's now like left school grounds. He's gonna go find Ferris, right? So he like there's like this sequence where he goes to a pizza shop, right? He sees someone who has a coat that looks similar to Ferris and also has short hair, but only sees them from the back, and he like walks up on them and basically says, you're basically caught. Says something in French first, to kind of suggest that they got them right. But then les jeux sont fois, the game is up, is what he says. But then when the person turns around, it's a woman, right? And she like, she looks at him, she deals a bit of soda and spits at him, right? What is that?
So it's a military. It's actually a U.S. military thing.
Oh.
It's called the U.S. Army's 32nd Armored Regiment. It's their beret, and it usually has a motto that says "Victory or Death," basically.
That's so
And
weird.
it's very weird, but he puts it on. It kind of makes sense because I think he says something in it like, Bueller, Ferris Bueller, like so it's sort of like a James Bond moment that he's setting up, but
Mhm.
they want to do, they don't want to promote the British military, right? So you got to promote the U.S. Army. So that's what the insignia is.
Yeah. So yeah, so then Rooney goes, and then what they do is after that he goes to like a little hot dog stand. There's a baseball game happening. Right. This is one of
I
my
think it's
first
like
big
the
time like
bar, right? Like,
yeah,
but
it's the
yeah,
bar.
he's getting he's cleaning off because yeah, she spit soda on his face
Yeah.
or whatever, and he's wiping it off. Yeah, and so yeah, you get the Cubs game being on in the background.
Yeah, and then who you see is like there's like a I think it's a foul ball that goes into, and
Hmm.
then who catches the foul ball? Ferris Bueller, right? He's on the screen. Rooney just misses him. He doesn't see it. There's a funny joke when he asks him, he says, "What's the score? 0-0. Who's winning?" And the guy says, "The Bears." I always find in these movies the people that I like the most are the like small working characters who basically shit up the Bears. Like, oh, you fucking dummy. Because the actors they get who play it always really seem to nail it. The Bears, dude. Like, so yeah, this is one of my interesting things. So, okay. I've always been used to, and maybe they do it differently in Chicago, 1 o'clock are games for after. There are games that happen during school days for baseball. They've always been 1 o'clock, right? So the movie has these weird timeline things that don't make any sense to me because like if they were at the lunch, I guess they were there at noon. So they were there for a half an hour. They were able to get a cab to Wrigley. I don't know how far Wrigley is from there to get to the game, which I guess they're there for like what, 30 minutes to catch up. Like the movie that just gets a little ridiculous in terms of its timeline patterns, right? I don't know if they have noon game, but if they had a noon game, it'd be too early for them to get to the restaurant. So the movie that just begins like I was watching it over the weekend, like this is stupid, right? Like this doesn't work, right? And I think I said to Jay via text that like maybe the whole like Ferris is in his head thing is how people reconcile actually the shit having so many logical holes that it doesn't really make any sense for him to be able to get from a restaurant to Wrigley Field to an art museum to and I'd be curious if anyone is from Chicago. I'd be curious like how far that actual suburb is for them to get from there because they do a lot that morning too.
It's like it's not far, so it is like 25-minute drive into the city or whatever. So like that, but like you're totally right. I mean, like if you add up all of the things that they do, and I don't know Chicago well enough to know like how far are all of these things away from each other, but I just know like, being in cities and going on a day out, you know, it's a lot harder to do like multiple things and it takes a lot longer length of time. I mean, a baseball game alone, I mean, in theory, like maybe they just show up for a little bit, but like they definitely didn't sit through the whole game because the entire baseball game before pitch clock, we're talking about like, 3 hours, right? Like, so, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because, but they do say something like we'd be in gym right now, right? And they cut over to that and there's gym class, and Ferris's sister. I hate this. I hate Ferris, all this stuff going. But there's way more that happens within the scope of the film than would actually be possible during a school day. Granted, they have until 6. Like that's the one thing that we do know is that the father says he wasn't come home until 6. So that's like kind of one of the things we know timeline wise. But
Hmm.
still, nonetheless, obviously it's too much. Like nobody could do all this stuff in one day.
Okay, so my only thing about the 6th thing, I'm gonna be a stickler on this, and I wanna ask someone who knows the area if they do, is there traffic? Because I would imagine in places like that where there's tons of people who live in in the suburbs who go from to work, when they have to go back home, they would not get in a traffic jam? Like, well, no, they actually show it. They show them in traffic. I'm sorry, when they're in the cab, and Sloane sees her dad and does the whole like kiss at him. So they actually do invoke the traffic. So like, it's just it gets a little and a parade in the middle of anything. It just gets very cavalier, and I'm like, it's just what's to add to the hell yeah, there's traffic. Someone wrote exactly. Thank you, Petey. Like exactly, right? Exactly. There is tons of fucking traffic, right? It's just it gets very, very, very fantastical, and like this one, like it began to kind of grate me a little bit watching the movie, right? Like I was just like, yeah, this is annoying. Um, then you get Rooney getting to the place and doing the whole thing where he presses the button and you hear the messages, right? That Ferris has set up, and like I mean, I will say, I think, what kid didn't want to be able to do some shit like this, like to be able to have the elaborate setup to be able to trick people and fuck around with people, set up an audio system, you know, so forth and so on. Like, yeah. But then Rooney, starts to break it. This is where it gets like really kind of crazy if you think about it. And Jay kind of brought it up. Rooney basically tries to break into the house, right? Like he tries to like literally break into the crib, right? To basically catch Ferris. Once he basically discovers that it's a recording, right? But like, they
Which
do the whole go ahead.
which, like, is insane. I mean, like, could you imagine how upset you would be of a family if the fucking dean of the school broke into your house to catch your
Exactly.
son? Like
Even
like
if Ferris was totally in the wrong. I'm sorry. I caught your son. Good. How'd you do it? I broke into your house and I found him. You did what? It's like, and I guess there's only two ways you could think about it from Hughes's mentality. He was to show how unhinged Rooney is, right? Like that, like these people, they've lost it so much, and it only helps you root for Ferris more, right? Or the other kind of read is that, well, no, that's the only read, actually. I think, actually, I'm sorry, I was gonna have another read. I was wrong. That's the only read that you could have. He wants to, it's how he adds to it. Like, like this dude is fucking out of his mind. And of course, he embarrasses him. The guy can't get through. He's in a mud pot, gate with the thing, it's spraying the gun, trying to clean it. And then what happens? The fucking dog, right? Because, eventually, because he sticks his head into, there's like a dog,
a dog door, yeah.
a dog door, and they have and they don't have a dog, they have a fucking Rottweiler, like, which is also kind of wild. Like they don't. It's funny. Like I wasn't expecting a Rottweiler in that home. Like they had a fucking Rottweiler like right fucking there, and like it fucks Rooney up. Right, he gets into a whole thing with it and chases him around, and it messes him up.
And he eventually breaks a potted plant over
Yeah,
its head too.
yeah,
Thank God the dog, gets him back in the
yeah,
end. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, the sorry. The whole thing with Rots was very interesting to me too. I mean, there's so many things in this movie when I go back to it and I'm like, was this responding to something that was like popular in the time, or did it create the response? Because I knew a lot of people with Rottweilers when I was growing up, and I don't know a single person in the world right now that has a Rottweiler. I'm sure there are, but it's not popular in the way that it was in the 80s and the 90s. And like now the equivalent is like pit bulls, like people who have pit bulls nowadays, you see
Mhm.
them more often. But Rottweilers were a thing in the 80s, and
Yeah.
like Rottweilers and German Shepherds, it
German
felt like were like
Shepherds.
about, yeah.
And I think those become things heavily in the 80s with like Night Stalker stuff, which is kind of invoked when because eventually Jeannie will see, she doesn't know it's Rooney at first. She'll see a man in the place. She thinks it's Ferris and she beats his ass, and she calls the cops that someone is chasing her. So when like you have the various break-ins, Bundy, Night Stalker, things like that. The kind of invocation of like having a dog for safety. I think things like and a big dog like Rottweilers and German Shepherds. Those things became really, really, I think popular. At least they were in. I don't know how many people actually. I guess people did get them, but like I know they were also like endorsed heavily.
I mean, and maybe this is like a country city thing too, but like growing up in the country, I knew a bunch of people who had Rottweilers. Like, and it was a
What
thing, like, yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I think
Dobermans
it
were
was
another
how
big one too.
yeah, I think it was how because it was about the whole thing about slipping into your house and getting in through the windows and things like that. So making sure you have an attack dog that can be there to kind of get you. So I think
Yeah. It
it's
was also
double
before
enforced.
like alarm systems were a big thing. Like,
Yep.
like I mean, they were, but they like not to the extent that they are now. Um, so yeah, I mean that's fascinating. But they have that. Um,
I think the
I guess there's
artist
not.
there's like
Yeah,
the
they go
art institute sequence, which is like
the
annoying,
stupidest
but
part of the movie. I mean,
I
like,
know.
there's a whole that this whole period of the film is hard for me to like rewatch. I'm like, how did I fast forward through this? Like, what was I doing? Because you had the art institute scene, and they're just going around and they're like looking at art and they're posing in certain ways around it and stuff. And it's just kind of a strange scene. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's trying to do two things with like the montage and the music. Well, three things. Hughes has said he really wanted to kind of show off like Chicago as a kind of like high place of culture globally. So whatever you want with that, using a museum, we
Jackson Pollock is in,
Right,
you know,
right,
yeah.
exactly. So there's that. The one is like also I think with the music, because one thing they do with the film consistently is like they like to also have Sloane situated with Ferris in a way that like he has never done anything wrong and he never really does anything wrong. So like they have that sequence where they're kind of like in love, or like you see them like kiss. It's like one of the only times I think you see them kiss. And then I think ending it with Cameron, right? Him kind of dazed out with that music, I think is like the big hook to say like Cameron is lost. He can't even appreciate art, right? Like there's like this beautiful thing and Cameron can't even appreciate that. So that's like a big thing about it. It's like, trying to be, it's whatever to me. I've never really, you know, the next thing is they're in the cab, and that's the one of the first time that Ferris's dad is sees him, and they have to do a double take, and then they do the quick cut, and it's Sloane in the car, and they do the very typical John Hughes thing of older man, younger woman having a little like wink winks, flirt. He loves doing that in movies. He did that in it's like a big thing that he likes doing of like the older married dude being able to flirt with a young woman in a car.
Every vacation movie, yeah.
Every vacation movie, he's like really into it, and it's interesting to situate Sloane, because John Hughes's wife, he actually went to high school with and was a cheerleader. It's mentioned that she's a cheerleader in the film, so I think she's in some ways a composite of his wife. I don't know what else like adds to that, but also like I also find it interesting that like they get someone like Sara to play Sloane, right? Next to Broderick, right? And how they dress her and these like kind of like these like pump boots and it's like a leather coat with like the whatever they call them. I forget what they call those things. For like cowboy cowgirl or
Oh,
whatever.
like the Fringe or whatever, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So and I as a not to make like value judgments on who can have what, but I do think her particular look, like thin, right? It's him playing on his fantasia of how he wants, her to be situated, right? Because it's also interesting. Molly Ringwald wanted to play it, and he said no because the part is too small and insignificant for you. So there he's readily admitting that Sloane is just a kind of a device for Ferris. Like she doesn't really have agency as a character if he's denying Molly Ringwald the ability to do it. So it's very creepish, it's very weird, it's very funky. But yeah, there's that sequence, and then like, she kind of kisses at him, whatnot. They use it as like a distraction thing, and then like she plays around, and like the dad is confused, and you see the paper where it says city rallies around youth who's like sick, right? And then and then you have like the float scene, which is like
Yeah, one other
famous
thing
as
that
fuck.
we yeah, which actually there's a whole bunch of stuff to go into that, even though it's a
Oh
stupid scene, but
yeah.
yeah. But, the we forgot to mention, I think, the commodities exchange scene, which is, like, very brief, but they go to the
Oh
commodities
right,
exchange in
yeah.
Chicago,
Yeah.
and that the only reason I'm bringing it up is not because of that, although it's another thing that they do in this day, but because this is when Ferris also proposes to Sloane, and that's when you find out she's a cheerleader because he says, "You'd be," she's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know, like, why not? I mean, you'd be the only cheerleader with a wife, but or with a husband, but what else does that mean, right?" And then Cameron gives the whole thing of, "I'll give you two reasons why not, my mother and my father," and goes into the whole thing about how his father hates his mother. You've seen them. It's like that car. He loves that car. He hates my mother, just like he also hates Cameron, right? So like there's this that comes up, and obviously it comes back up because this is kind of an ongoing thing. Like she doesn't say yes, but she also doesn't sort of say adamantly no. So it's sort of hanging. The proposal between them is also hanging throughout the film, and it's he's a senior, she's a junior, and he's gonna go off to college the following year, and she'll still be there. So this is like part of the thing around all of this. But anyway, weird, but that's part of the film too.
Yeah. So now we have our glorious uh float scene, which all people seem to love in this world. So one of the things about the float scene that I did find out also is in the original script, you actually have a lot more lines. So the Cameron Sloan sequence is actually originally much longer. And it's like Cameron and Sloan actually have a big like heart to heart about life and future. And apparently Sloan talks about kind of like her perspective. And it had a lot to do with like being a woman and her the limitations she saw in her life and so forth and so on. But it tested apparently terribly, because the women who saw it, the young women who saw it, thought it was terrible writing, a terrible representation of women. Hughes apparently was like, they didn't really get it. I was trying to actually defend women, in their position in society, yada yada yada. Hughes is a dummy. I'm sure. I read little lines of it. It sounded stupid. It sounded like Hughes not knowing anything and him thinking he's going to like, have some kind of defense of young women. He doesn't know shit about young women. So that's in that sequence. But yeah, the float sequence is like to me another example of um the movie kind of setting up into like Ferris. It's like the climax of like his like metaphysical abilities. He's so grand that he can go into a kind of like celebratory moment of like community and city and not only be a part of it, like be the centerpiece and dominant force of it and like raise it to a level that it would have never have found without him. So he is like the celebratory apex of society, right? And I say that because like that's how I felt watching it when I was a kid, right? Like I felt like it was literally the he was like the summit of like our like great youth society, right? So there's like the part where he's singing like Dunkeshay with like the women and like they're dressed up. It doesn't really make sense. I'm actually curious, Jay, what if he got a sense of what the actual like float thing is about. There's
Yes,
American flags.
yes.
Um,
I
what is
looked
it?
this up. I looked this up because I was so confused by it this time. I was like, "Wait, what is this? Like, did they actually have a parade where they have like what is this parade in this film?" So, it's the Von Steuben Day Parade, which is an annual parade in Chicago to celebrate German American heritage based on von Steuben comes from Baron von Steuben, who is the Prussian like mercenary guy who's like very important to the kind of military strategy around the American Revolution, right? So the point of the American flags, right, which doesn't kind of make sense because you're like, why is there this German shit, but then there's American flags everywhere, right? Is that it is sort of this celebration of German American identity, but specifically like blended into Americana and the American Revolution. So it's a really funny kind of thing. And I mean, like in certain ways, right? When you think about all of the anti-European kind of stuff and American stuff that they're promoting, that they would have this display that's about is very connected in with like the American Revolution and American identity, but then is also drawing on this like German American thing. So it's like an integration, like if you're gonna come here, be about the American project, right? Like, fight for it, right? That kind of stuff. And so yeah, it's an interesting little history around this thing.
That's
And then of course,
fascinating.
yeah. I didn't never heard of it, and I've never heard of it anywhere else, but it is a thing in Chicago. But it started in 1972, so it's also not like a very long span. And when this film comes out, it's been going on for like 15 years. So it's not like, it's not as deep as like the St. Patrick's Day parade or something else that you could do that way. Um, but it's also more connected in with, even though it has this ethnic kind of connection, it is really about, you know, America, right? It's not so much of like calling to the heritage of German people, although they are singing Dankeschön. But yeah.
So the next part is the song transfers over to Twist and Shout, right? Which is like super fucking famous. But the thing that always I remember from this sequence, right? That always remembers in my brain is this random ass sequence with a bunch of black people doing a choreographed dance down a bunch of steps. And it was, I have to say, it's always never made sense to me. And as I've gotten older and older, I'm like, what the fuck is this that you have a bunch of like black people? And like, and it's funny because if you look at the people they have cast in that sequence, right? Like they're meant to look like kind of like city people, like they have like t-shirts on, right? It's like, so kind of going back to that sequence, right? Where Ferris is able to basically rally everything. He basically brings out even the like people that are like unseen of the community. Like, so like the black people in Chicago, which we've seen two black people in this movie. You have the nurse and you have the other parking garage attendant. Maybe there's another one, I don't know, right? These are those the ones who are immediately invoked. But like there's this way that like there's a lot of the city that you never see. So this sequence, like, and because they have like shots of like the construction workers, of people on the street. So this parade becomes aware like Ferris, because of his like high level kind of status that they want to create, he's even able to bring the black people out. And like because they literally the shot, they literally come out, right? Like they're not there. They like literally come out, and it's almost like they're coming out of a tunnel, like the people under the stairs. And I'm like, what the fuck is this weird ass shit? Like this, like to me, I like it makes me so uncomfortable, and it's so fucking weird, right? And the fact that they do this kind of like dance, like it's just it's it's like they do a it's like they do like a kind of like huh 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 dance, and it's so fucking weird, man. But yeah, that sequence sullies the I mean, it's stupid, but like it also just sullies the shit out of it to me.
I'm not gonna play it, but I just because we probably get a copyright thing, but I just to show the image, like that's like what you're talking
Like
about
in
there, right?
like
Yeah.
right there in the hood, right? Like their outfits, the way they look, it's like it's so weird, right? And it's like, where did they think that this was an interesting? Well, no. Actually, let me take that part out. It's definitely interesting to them, for I think, for what they from what I was saying. Like it reads to me as they want to show the power of Ferris, and the power of Ferris is even getting the lump in black people out, and they can get he can even get the Negroes dancing. Right. Yeah. But he can even, but I think that's a thing. I mean, black people dance, right? Twist and shout. He got some, Ferris got the power. He can even get the Negroes dancing. That's how dope he is.
Yeah, Twisted Shout's a fascinating one too, right? Because it's like I forget who actually wrote it, but the Isley brothers like popularize it, but then the Beatles steal it and then make
Yep.
it way bigger, right? So, you know, yeah, anyway. And the version that he does is most like the kind of Beatles version of it, but you know, um yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is weird, but I think it's like on the simple kind of John Hughes brain level, I think it's just like to show the power of Ferris, that everybody loves this guy. Like he can do no wrong and he can mobilize anything, It's weird. Um anyway, and then of course his father's up in the ad agency skyscraper, like looking down on him and can't, doesn't know what's going on. And this is also part of it too, is like they're like, you're gonna get in trouble. This is one of the reasons I added that like it would never happen in the internet age too, is like there would be so much surveillance evidence of all the things that, being in the Cubs game, being in, but that's none of that is there, right? Because, you're not yet in that age where information and video and stuff like that is so accessible in all those ways.
Yeah. So yeah, so you get out of that scene, you see what's his name, Rooney hit the dog with the thing. He loses his car. There's also this thing where he keeps getting tickets that doesn't really make any sense. I'm like, are they ticketing him like every hour or every 20 minutes? Like, how long has he been there? It doesn't really make any sense, but he eventually gets his car like towed away. So like he keeps getting the joke made on him. They go back to the garage, right? The minute they get there, the car kind of gets there. They're none the wiser. They get the car back, right, and they drive off, and they're like, "Oh, it looks good, everything's great." But then you have the other kind of like well-known scene of where, well, no, yes, you have. Oh no, first you have is connected because they keep cross-cutting, but they go to Cameron basically seeing the speedometer. Well, Ferris sees it first, and the speedometer is like over 300, right? And then Cameron has his, oh moment where he like loses his mind. And then, but before that, you also have I think Jeannie trying to call her mom. And like we haven't talked a lot about Jeannie in the movie, but there's a way that I think that it's indicative of how she's kind of like treated in the movie because like, and I guess we'll get to the scene with Charlie Sheen in a moment. It's like I was watching it this time, and I was like, okay, she has a beef with her brother, which like I think is legitimate. Like he gets away with shit, like and like you don't listen, and y'all are kind of stupid. But there's a way that the her entire functionality is to kind of be like a complainer, right? And like it's just like a kind of like um she's like a different kind of Cameron. While Cameron's depressed, she's obsessed, right? And it's her obsessions that are her problem. Nothing else is really her problem. She's this kind of like daughter who's just she doesn't really have a character. She's like a functionary, right? To kind of give Ferris a little bit of heat on his back, right? And the possibility that he could get caught. So like the lack of commentary on the character is like her functionality is really, really quite mundane, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you have the scene where she comes home to
Hmm.
see to find that, like she comes home from school is basically what it is, I think, right? And Ferris is gone and she knew it. And she's like, I knew it. She busts in his room, all that stuff. But then at the same time, Rooney is now like knocked out the dog and is trying to get back into the house and breaks in again. And so she comes downstairs and she thinks it's Ferris and he thinks she's Ferris, right? So you have this kind of like little comedic kind of, thing or whatever. But then they come upon each other and he's all fucked up at this point too, right? Because the dog has really put him through the ringer and everything. And his clothes are all torn, his face is all like kind of scarred and bruised or whatever. But she's like, it's a rapist basically in my house, right? And so then she kicks him, I think 3 times in the balls or something like
No,
that.
in the face, in the face.
Oh, in
He
the
gets
face.
like
That's
he
right.
gets
That's
like
right.
three like really good kicks in the face.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Like she goes like, yeah, like taekwondo on him, kicks him in the face. And then just runs up to her upstairs, like screaming, right? Like, and calls the police, and then she's like speaking to him. I think he leaves and she's speaking to him through the door answering,
Yeah.
thing or whatever.
Hmm.
And, she's like, you better get out of here. I forget what she says, but then she's like, I've got a raging case of herpes too. Well, she said,
Yeah.
call the police and I've got a raging case of herpes, I think,
Yeah. This
yeah.
is one of the. I think it's like I have my dad's gun in a raging case,
Yeah.
raging
Yeah.
case of herpes. Yeah, which
Yeah.
is like I said, I think kind of going into like the Night Stalker kind of thing, and like kind of like invoking like I think the kind of social things like people breaking into your house at that time. The very like suburban fears and things like that that were kind of like built in, but also like situating Rooney in there too by kind of like this character he broke into his house and did all this stuff. So Yeah, so you have that. Then yeah, you get Cameron back at their place, and right, like they're trying to like get Cameron like um revived, right, and he's like lost it. Ferris has a couple of his like aside moments. I think this is the aside moment where Ferris makes that kind of crass thing about like the first person that he meets, he's going to like marry, and she's gonna treat him like shit, right? Um, which is like
Yeah. It's just
okay,
terrible, like, yeah, it's like pop culture or pop psychology, like just this
yeah.
sort of relationship advice of people who like, yeah, yeah. We've
You're
all
fucking
heard
17.
tons of this
Also,
stuff.
but, like, you're 17, 18 years old. You don't know shit, bro. Like, like be
Yeah.
quiet, man. Like, you haven't even gone to college yet. Like, just shut up.
You're trying to marry a 17-year-old cheerleader as a high school student too, right?
Right,
Like, yeah, like,
exactly,
yeah.
dummy. Like, and then he mentions about like the whole thing about Sloan being a junior and he's in love. He wants to marry her, so forth and so on. And so they keep juxtaposing in that, and then they eventually get to the part where Cameron, I guess they're at Sloane's place. But I don't think it's made. Is it made explicit that they're at Sloane's?
They never say it, right? And
Yeah,
it's never like explained, but I've just been doing research on the film. That's
yeah,
what it's supposed to be. It's probably again like cuts that were taken out, right? Where
yep,
like you don't, context is missing. But yeah, they're
yeah.
they're in Sloane and Ferris are in the jacuzzi together, in like their underwear, right? And Cameron, this is the stupidest part of it. They've placed Cameron in a lounge chair on top of a fucking diving board. Like,
Makes no sense.
like, what the fuck are you
Dummies.
doing? He's like catatonic at this point, right? Or they think he is. And they put him there. And so then he does the whole thing of you can tell watching it that he is conscious and does it on purpose, but they don't know that. And so he leans in and falls into the pool and like feigns drowning basically, and Ferris pulls him out and he's like seemingly not breathing or whatever, and then he does the Ferris Bueller "you're my hero" thing, and it
Hmm.
comes out that he was faking. Sloane's a little bit upset that now we find out that Cameron was faking the whole time and saw her change into her nightgown or whatever that she's swimming in, and yeah, so anyways.
So the next part is, yeah, Jeannie is in the police station, right? She's at the police station, and you have the whole sequence with Charlie Sheen, which part it's interesting because the way they edit the film is just to make him a kind of character that Jeannie eventually meets. In the original, actually shot movie, it's a much more elaborate kind of storyline where he is like the son of the family that Ferris's mom was showing a house to. Um, there's also like another backstory where like Ferris actually knows the guy that Charlie Sheen is. Um, and like something was wrong with their family. And I think Ferris maybe like tried to help him or some shit, but it didn't happen. So that's why he's trying to help Cameron. It sounds actually really sappy and incredibly stupid. And I'm sure made the movie worse, and that's why they cut it. But they eventually truncate it to just being, this person that Jeannie meets, which makes that line feel differently because at the moment where she says like, um, her brother, oh, who is he? Ferris Bueller. Oh, you know him. And in the movie, the way it sits now, it makes like he's just heard of him, like in the constant chatter of like the sick kid. But like in this one, it's actually the original is supposed to be like someone he actually did know really well.
Yeah, there's the whole like because they go back and forth a little bit, and he actually says like, which this is funny because like in some ways I agree with him on some of this, although I do think that in many ways she's my favorite character in the film on some level, like because I guess because she sees through the bullshit of all of this that like nobody else really does, right? um but he's basically like, you're being a hater, like your brother's getting away with, he doesn't know it's Ferris yet, right? But he's like, she's like, my brother's, stayed home from school. He's done all this stuff. Like he convinced my parents. Da, da, da. And he's like, what do you care? Like, why are you being, why are you mad if he gets over? Right. Like, that's not your problem. I get it. I mean, I also didn't have siblings growing up. So, like, maybe that is also like with my kids, they would absolutely be at each other's fucking throats about some shit like that. He gets to do this, da, 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 da. So I think it makes sense that way. But I am sort of in some ways uh on team Sheen here on like, don't be a snitch. Like, why are you going overboard to try to get him in trouble for this? You know, but the funny part is that she kind of he's like, I think you need to deal with your own problems, is what he says to her, which is funny too, because he's also like, he's in there for drugs, and he starts it off that way of like, drugs, like she's like, what? No, I'm fine. He's like, no, I mean, are you in for drugs? I'm in for drugs. Right? Like this is like kind of the whole thing, which of course with Charlie Sheen is also interesting.
Very
Um,
much.
yeah, but that he's supposed to kind of help her see the light, right? And in some ways, maybe that's supposed to explain her behavior at the end of the film as well. She obviously falls for him, and they're like making out as her mom is in talking to the police person. They also don't really, this is another thing that's annoying in the film, is they don't actually, they provide the back explanation of why she's there, right? She called the police, and the police have arrested her for making a false report, but
Hmm.
like that's not shown. And so anyways, you have that going on, which is obviously absurd, and they know it's absurd within the film, right? So there's kind of a weird thing going on here where it's like she gets screwed over by everybody, right, within the
Right.
film.
Yeah, because like, it's weird. The
Anyway,
only scene they have before that is like the sexogram sequence with Louis Anderson, where like someone sends Ferris a sexogram to his place, which like even when I was a kid, I was like, whoa, what is this little scene in the movie? Like, and I can't, it's just, that's also the stuff where I'm like, who are you marketing this movie to, dude? It's like,
teenagers, right? Like, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like yeah, teens, yeah, who are in the middle of their weird fantasia, but a lot of preteens and under preteens watch this movie, right? So that sequence is juxtaposed with bringing the car back to the garage. Of course, the backwards doesn't work, and then you have the sequence where Cameron, he basically like has his emotional outburst where he kicks the front of the car in, right? And before he's supposed to like kick it to like destroy it, he like stops himself, but of course that doesn't stop the momentum in the car. Eventually once he leans on it, it goes out the back and it destroys it, right? And they do this like I think manipulative thing where Ferris basically is like, I'll allow myself to get caught on everything, right? To kind of situate Ferris as essentially an altruistic friend who would risk this great day and his flawless deceptive reputation to help his friend. But no, Cameron says, I'm going to take this on the chin, and me and my dad are going to have a chat and get the sappy music and yada 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 blah blah blah, kind of stuff. You also have that weird sequence where also before that I mentioned where Sloane asked Cameron, did he peek at her? Right? And he admits it that he does he say it I think he says it verbally, right?
He
And
doesn't, yeah, he doesn't say it, he just smiles and doesn't respond.
right,
But yeah,
like
yeah.
he within the facial you'll get the acknowledgement. And it's funny because like there's a way that they situate that sequence that are like, because they're three friends, it's okay, right? But the way that sequence is like situated, it's very male centric. Like the possibilities of even that being like, hey, that's I'm not gonna get even if she was like, hey, I'm not gonna get mad at you, but Cameron, now is fucked up, bro. You shouldn't be doing that shit, or that's some weird, or even say that's weirdo, like you don't even get that, right?
Or like Ferris doesn't care at all either, too, right? Which is like, yeah,
Yeah, he don't
yeah,
even be like, "What you looking at?" But then but that's also that weird thing, right? The two friends and the two male. It's yes, all the weird thoughts that the negative thoughts that you might be having about kind of boys will be boys on this thing. I do think is like applies, right? But
yeah,
yeah, so but at the end of it, you get the sappy music where Cameron, he's gonna go see dad. And it's funny, like I've always said when growing up, I always have thought about, well, what's gonna happen after that? I'm like, I don't know if I was like, I don't think that conversation gonna be very, very, very fun.
yeah. People in the chat have already said, like, I feel like this movie is the last day of Cameron's life, right? Like that this is like the which, like, I do think, like, the idea of Ferris taking the heat is based around the idea that he knows that, like, he never really gets in trouble. So even if he does all of this, that, it would be fine. So I'm gonna read Cameron's, like, monologue here, even though it's probably not worth, but
No, you're
he
fine.
says, he says, "I gotta take a stand. I'm bullshit. I put up with everything. My old man pushes me around. I never say anything. Well, he's not the problem. I'm the problem. I gotta take a stand. I gotta take a stand against him. I'm not gonna sit on my ass as the events that affect me unfold to determine the course of my life. I'm gonna take a stand. I'm gonna defend it. Right or wrong, I'm gonna defend it. I am so sick of his shit. I can't stand him, and I hate this goddamn car. Who do you love? Who do you love? You love a car, son of a bitch, right? And this is also going on as he's like denting it, and right before he kicks it off, and then he says, "Shit, I dented the shit out of it." But then later, then afterwards, he's like, "Good, my father will come home. He'll see what I did. I can't hide this. He'll come home. He'll see what I did. He'll have to deal with me. I don't care. I really don't. I'm tired of being afraid. Hell with him. I can't wait to see the look on the bastard's face." Right. And so like there's this whole it leads to this like, yeah, the sappy music is kind of like synthesizer, like rising hero music of like Cameron has finally overcome the sort of demons of his father and is taking control of his life and is not going to be, sad and depressed and sit in his bed, all the time anymore. And so, yeah, that's the
And
which becomes for the people who love this theory, this is the point, and this is why Cameron is the hero, and Ferris all along was just a fiction of his imagination to allow him to get over his shit with his father.
so this also just makes it that, Ferris, none of this would have happened if Ferris didn't convince him to, cut school and steal the car from his dad. So in the end, even though Ferris is a jerk who's manipulative, it was all for the greater good of helping Cameron, right? Um, so then yeah, you get this sequence. Well, you juxtap. So it's interesting that the next two sequences happen back to back to me. It's very situated. So the next sequence is Jeannie making out with Charlie Sheen, and you see her joyful for the first time in the movie, right? She has like a light to her. She's very, so there's basically she's able to make out with this guy. They have the Shauna music happen. She like shares what her friends call her. She's now kind of, been awakened because she's had this like moment with this guy, right? So like the guy is what lifts her. The literal next scene is the sequence between Sloane and Ferris, where basically they have their last moment together, and they kiss, and she kind of gives him credit for helping Cameron and all that, and then he goes off and she says he's gonna marry me. These two scenes back to back shows you how John Hughes likes to situate his male characters and his women characters in movies.
It's really fucked up. Like it
It's
really is. I
very
mean, obviously, yeah, the idea that like, Jeannie just needs to get laid, right? Like it's sort of like the undertone there, right?
and
Not
like and like
very
and that kind of like she's the dregs of society guy to kind of get her straight, right? it's
yeah.
it's
And the 7 and, you know, and that the 17-year-old, like, she just needs to be married by Ferris, and this is, like, the greatest possible life outcome that could come to, like, anyone, right? To put that kinda shit in, like, movies for kids and teens, like, which is the primary, like, audience for all of this, like, yeah. I mean, but it again, this is what I'm saying about the conservatism. Like, this is a very, like, you know, conservative, Reaganite kind of family values sort of lesson that's going on here, you know? Anyway.
Stop complaining, young women. Stop. Stop complaining. Just it's all good. Let it go, right? I mean, it's the conservative bullshit. I agree. It's so bad.
So yeah, Ferris realizes what time it is and takes off booking it from Sloane's house, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, this is the one athletic kind of moment of the whole film, really, because he does all kinds of crazy shit in this, you know, run home. But he's running, and counterposed with this is Jeannie driving the station wagon with mom in the passenger seat. You know, mom says, "Do you know what it's like to be pulled out of work to pick your daughter up at the police station?" Jeannie, "No, not really." And then mom says, "Well, on top of everything else, I was about to close the damn deal with the Vermont people," which I guess is supposed to be Charlie Sheen's parents or
Yep.
whatever,
Yep.
right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and she says, "I'm sorry." And then she says, "I was going to take the commission and buy Ferris a car." Right? So, like, again, like, oh, like, all of this, like, you're doing all this shit now to get him a fucking car, like, this is the most important thing, you know, again, like, to bring home,
Yeah.
and, of course, now he's running, and right as this happens, right, he runs right in front of their car. Again, this is we haven't gone in through all of the times that this stuff happens throughout the movie, but this is probably, like, the 5th or 6th time that there's
Mm-hmm.
been, like, he's right in front of either his mother or his father, and they don't see him, and you know, she slams on the brakes, Jeannie slams on the brakes, all the real estate papers like go all over. So that's why she doesn't see him, is that she's sorting out her papers and of course, like, she has no interest in the person that her daughter almost hit and killed, right? Like, as as a young driver, as the mom in the passenger seat, like, no, not even important at all. Um, but so they lock eyes, they glare at each other, and then Ferris takes off running, and Jeannie just starts like ripping it in the cul-de-sac, driving
Yeah.
like 70.
And Ferris, knows the way that he knows, because he's Ferris. He knows the easiest backdoor way to cut through everything to get there, to go this backyard. It reminds me of this movie, The Swimmer, from the late 60s, with Burt Lancaster, where he goes through each person's backyard to like swim across to each pool. He knows like all the yeah, the idea that suburban people know the charting through all their homes. There's also the very, the sequence where one of the homes he rows to, there's two girls, laying out, sunbathing, and he has to stop and, introduce himself. And they have no problem that some dude just ran through their backyard and he has to introduce himself. They don't think that's weird at all. There's nothing weird about that, dudes running through your place, so, so yeah, he's running. There's even a sequence where his dad is coming home, right? And he runs next to his dad. There's the meant to be funny part of like the dad driving behind the old woman who can't see above her, So like it's like a big thing, all montage with like, hype music. So it's in a very like, soundtrack heavy kind of movie, right? Which then, gets him all the way to his house with the climax point. Who's waiting there is Rooney, right? Who has his key. I guess he leaves a key under his mat, right? And he has it. So Rooney basically like has got him caught. He's got him like, dead to rights. But then of course who opens the door because they get home in front is Jeannie with the parents. The parents have a conversation that the mom lets the dad know that like she had to get it from the police station. He said, what does the dad say? I think we should shoot her. Which is like, I was like, damn, like, damn. But like also situated that she's like the problem child. It's just like, it's very 80s coded. It's fucking bad. But of course, when Jeannie goes to the back door, you're led to believe that, like, oh, maybe she's gonna team up with Rooney, but she doesn't. She basically says, oh, Ferris, come back home. I'm glad to see you're here. She basically like continues Ferris's lie because she finds Rooney's wallet, which was left in, which you see early. And she knows it's Rooney who had broken into the house. And I always find this ending interesting because what it does is it shows that ultimately Jeannie, even though she's like, I don't necessarily think like everything's alleviated with her brother, but in the greater good, the higher authority of these people, she would never she wouldn't side with them. Like, she does go to his office earlier in the film to kind of like say something about her brother, but if anything has taught her anything, I think through this experience is that higher authority, she can't go to that. In the end she will defend her brother against the higher authority, right?
I read it like even more cynically, probably,
Yeah.
that like that it's Charlie Sheen and her like brief moment in the police station that actually convinces her that ultimately she should just let Ferris be Ferris, kind of thing, and like, because that's like sort of his call, is like, it's your problem, it's not his problem,
Yeah.
like, let it go.
But there is something particular about Rooney that she doesn't like,
Yes,
though.
of
I
course, yeah,
think I
because
think I yeah.
yeah, he almost
You know
she in her view, like, he almost raped her at this point, like, she does, like,
yeah.
she's not gonna side with this guy over Ferris,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no. I know exactly. I totally agree with you, and I think it's like that combined with Rooney. Like, I still wonder because she wants to catch her brother, like even a moment before that in the car. Like, she wants to get him before she gets there. But then when Rooney becomes the second factor, she's like, "Oh, not fuck that shit though," right? Like, yo ass, fuck you, right? Um, but yeah, then Ferris gets upstairs. Like, there's like the mad dash to getting everything, and the baseball on turning off the thing, and by the end, you
Yeah,
know,
the baseball, we should reference just quickly, it's a plot device because he caught it at Wrigley Field. When he
oh,
gets
that's
into his
right.
bed When he gets into his bed, he realizes that the stereo with the snoring is still on, but his parents are about to come through the door. And so he's like, what do I do? He reaches into his back pocket. There's something there. Oh, it's the baseball I caught at Wrigley.
Yeah,
Chucks it across the screen. Perfect aim. Turns it off. Again, the magic of Ferris Bueller.
because he's
Um,
Ferris fucking Bueller, man. You
Yeah.
know,
The other thing, I mean, one minor point is Rooney in that scene says, "How would you like another year of high school under my close personal supervision?" Right?
supervision.
Like it's like fuck you.
Yeah,
Um
yeah, yeah,
the one part to go to. So after this, right? So this is the end, right? It's the
yeah,
reconciliation, Jeannie and Ferris, on the same team. Rooney gets kicked out. Ferris doesn't get caught because he makes it home in time for his parents. They're like, oh, he's hot, right? Of course he is. He's been running for like, 10 blocks or whatever it is,
yeah,
even more. Um, and so after this, like, you have the end credits part, which I find hilarious, like the way that this film does in the
the school
credits.
bus.
And so, yeah, the return of the "Oh Yeah" song by Yellow, which, like, actually an interesting thing about the soundtrack is, other than Donkashin and like Twist and Shout, most of the soundtrack are pieces that were not popular before this film, but
Yeah,
some of them became very popular afterwards. Like, that song was like Yellow, I think, is like a German band or something like that, which is actually kind of funny. It's interesting that the two pro, European kind of reference points in the film, might both be German in this way. So I don't know what that says about our boy, John Hughes. But anyways, they play that song, and Rooney is walking out, and he gets on a school bus, which is pretty funny scene. I don't remember exactly how it starts. I think the bus driver's like, "Do you need a ride?" Right? Recognizes him, and he gets on. And it's with like younger kids. I think they're all. I don't know if they're all. I don't know what age. Maybe they are high school. I don't know. Somebody in the chat might remember. But the funnier part to me is he sits down next to this girl, and she's like, "I bet you never smelled a real school bus before." And then she pulls out a couple of gummy bears and she's like, "Gummy bear?" She's like, "It's been in my pocket all day. They're real warm and soft." And he takes it
I bet
and
that
he
scene all
and
the
he
time.
he throws it and he looks over and the guy next to him, the kid next to him has "Save Ferris" like written on his binder or whatever. And it kind of like rolls through. There's a few other things and then there's like the oh, it does repeat the
Rooney
whole
was it the line? Is it Rooney something? There's a line about him too. It's like if
oh,
someone's
I don't remember that.
Rooney. Yeah, there's like Rooney eats it or something like that. There's like
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
a line about it.
The other thing too I forgot to mention is that they do repeat again the line that Barbara Bush said at the commencement, which is life comes at you fast. If you don't slow down, you might miss it or
Yeah.
whatever exactly it is. But like, this becomes the kind of slogan of the film. Um, and I just say like about the like to make a kind of larger point as we wrap up. I mean, the film we didn't even talk about like all of the extent of the product placement within the film. Paris is constantly drinking Pepsi. Like there's all
Yeah.
of this stuff within it. Um, all this kind of marketing and everything. But I think that also the idea, right, of this what makes a great American day, right? It's like getting away from the authority of the state and your parents and all of this, going out in getting the best sports car that you could possibly imagine, going to a baseball game, going to a museum, going to a expensive French restaurant, spending all of this money, cabs, etc. Like no one ever explains like where does all this money come from? Is it from the Save Ferris Buy Him a Kidney Fund, or is he just like, you know,
Right.
this wealthy as a kid, right? Um, because the idea that as a high school student in the 80s that you would have the means to be able to like go and do all of these expensive things that they do throughout the day. Like that's just accepted as like normative and aspirational, right? So I do also think about this film even with myself of like times when I was younger, I'd get into like credit card debt and shit like that, right? Of like this you've been like uh taught, right? That like in order to have fun, what you need to do is to go out and like do all of these things, spend all of this money in these different spaces that like there's no way you can possibly afford all that shit, you know.
I mean, the other thing, and like Hughes would have never have done this, is kind of going back to when I was younger. What I knew of kids who had that access, who would be able to buy shit, was either their parents did give them a lot of money, just straight out, and they just had money. They stole it from their parents, right? Which was another thing that they did. And then some of them, honestly, I know also did like because they had the ability to buy, they sold drugs. They had the ability to go out and buy it, and then they sold it and did it their own. They didn't need the money to do it, but they didn't have access, and they liked the kind of like rough kind of exterior that it did. So they would never. This is where this movie is to me a failure in that way. Like a Ferris Bueller would have that kind of extra thing. Like, look, the kid he's trying to get out of summer school, he ain't doing that shit for free. That kid is paying him either money, he's doing something for him, he's doing something, or the kid did something, he's blackmailing him. Like, stop it. Like, these people who did this shit in high school were fucking sociopaths and they did wild shit. And I saw it. Like, I saw it so much, right? Like, it happens all the time. So, like, this is where the movie's kind of it is bullshit, right? If he has like, I remember him in like the French restaurant giving the guy a tip, and like they're at a French restaurant that Abe Froman goes to, the Sausage King of Chicago. Like, that's a couple $100, right? So either he stole it, his parents just have him with a fucking infinite amount of money, which then makes no sense because he can't get a car, or he be doing some wild shit, or he stole it from
Yeah.
somebody else, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, and all of that tracks. And I just think it's like somebody made a really good comment a few minutes ago in the chat, which is propaganda to non-Americans is that this is how rich the average American teenager is in the United States. And like I think that's a really this is a much bigger point to make about Hollywood because and just about American popular media, Netflix shows, all of these kind of things is that most of them are centered around people who have this kind of wealth, right? Like you largely get that. Like you largely get people who just are magically independently wealthy. I mean, obviously his parents being, an advertising potential executive and a, realtor, whatever, like they would have money, but even with that, like I'm not sure that they would have the kind of money that is shown in this film. And that's just like part of how this dream is sold, but it also like it does do something to us, those of us who live in this country, right? Because most people in the United States do not have this kind of existence at all, but it sets up like that this is what your aspirations are, right? That this is what it means. So even for us, it's like, yeah, that's what it is to be a teenager in America. Like I want to be like Ferris Bueller. He has all this cool shit, does all this, gets to go out and do all these things, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it was deeply influential, even if I didn't necessarily like identify with him personally as a character. It still was like that's the dream that's sold by this kind of film.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mode, right? Like I think of Ferris Bueller as like an affectation that people try to put on. Like I'm gonna get my Ferris Bueller on. Like it's a fantasy, right? Like those moments where you kind of need to pep yourself up with like a kind of like archetype of something that if you're really honest with yourself doesn't really exist. um you adopt it as a kind of way to kind of like strengthen your sense of self, right? And ultimately like distort it. You distort social relations and the actual reality of existence, right? But that's kind of how I situate it, right? Now, where I think it gets really ugly, kind of what you're pointing out, is definitely on what it does to people who don't have means, who basically like overspend. But I also think the other thing is like the people who do have means, right? What it justifies within their own kind of self-worth to basically do fucked up shit because they think they're Ferris Bueller. Like if we bring in people like Teal, you know, Musk, there is a part of them that I think a significant part of them that thinks what they're doing is the greater good. They see society as Cameron, right? You know, like they see society for them as Cameron. They don't know what's good for them. So let me actually, lay off everybody and, make them fucking work and get stronger. Let me cut this program, so these people can like really understand what it is to like yearn for something. It's part of the same mentality to me, and it's yeah, it's Hughes's conservatism, and it shows his defiance of a particular kind of Americana and defense of another particular kind of Americana, which are both bad, right? Well, even the one that though the one he's defying, I actually think he has a reductive understanding. It's a bad thing, but also it's a reductive understanding of it because he thinks he's separate from it, from that totality. When really y'all are just kind of, it's the inter-imperialist war shit, right? France versus Germany. Well, this bad, this bad. Both y'all suck. You both want the same thing. You just want to be the powerful person. Essentially, is the positioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's like it's somebody else said something in the chat and I think I lost the comment, but this notion that like looking at the problems, right, also of these wealthy kids that you sort of you also relate to them. You're like, oh, like they're Cameron's going through shit too, right? Ferris doesn't have a car, like that. This is the that these are somehow equivalent, right, to the problems of people who are just like regular people or poor people or people of color or whatever, right? Like this kind of that we should identify with them and their struggles as well.
Yeah.
But ultimately the important part, right, is like that this ideology, right, that of Ferris of just like, get out of all that, like no fascism, no socialism, no anarchism, like just believe in yourself. Just it's all about me. It's about the individual. Yeah.
But yeah, I I mean, I guess one of the last things I'll say is I don't think though even people who think they're have a good relative level of consciousness don't really appreciate though how much that's been internalized even amongst us who think we're like on the right side of politics. And I that mentality of doing it ourselves, believe in yourself. Like I watched something the other day. I was looking at a Q&A from like a really great talk that a friend gave around politics and art and things like that. It was really good. And some of the questions that were asked of him would kind of go they wouldn't accept a kind of understanding that we need to kind of rethink the kind of way we think here in the United States around ourselves as professionals and career and all that. Everyone went back to this kind of me, I. And this is a room of people who are supposed to be on the precipice of being radical, political, left, whatever those degrees, but they couldn't get away from the I and the me. And I haven't talked to my friend about it, but I would see his face and he'd be like, okay, yes. But he's like, he's not gonna like go at these people. He's just gonna be very nice, but like interesting. Okay, interesting. I could tell he knew
Yeah.
like why are these people so fucking self-centered?
No, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, I struggle like a lot of my, you know, to the extent that we've had success with this podcast, like it's like, a lot of it then comes down to like it's easier for me to just do the work all by myself, right? And it's a problem, right? I recognize that it's a problem. Like I actually aspire because I understand what a problem is to something else, but it is difficult to, put that like bourgeois mentality, to check it, right? And to say, actually, no, like I need to be in community with other people and be organizationally minded about this thing and to recognize that like all the good ideas don't just come from me and like it's easier for me to like yeah, like this it's deep. That stuff is deep. I know it comes up in art, but it comes up heavy in like any creative space too, but in all kinds of stuff. um it's like it's a very bourgeois mentality that we've been inculcated with. you know yeah.
Make your mark. Make your mark. I always think of
Believe
Parenthood.
in yourself. And
Make
it's
your
like, and it's also
mark.
this, it's like it's also to get to like the neoliberalism thing too for a minute, right? It also becomes the like individualization of like things like risk, right? So it's like you can make those individual risky choices, but it's not like there's no check and balance. So Ferris operates totally, he makes every dangerous decision within the film. Every potentially risky situation within the
Mhm.
film is his decision, right? But it all works out for him because of his brilliance, right? And that's it. Yeah, I mean, you talked about like Musk and Teal and all those people. Like that's like that to the final degree. But yeah, I think films like this obviously play a role on all of us.
Yeah, I can imagine Musk has at least once a month playing "Oh Yeah" in his car as he's going to work.
Is fucking Cybertruck.
His fucking ugly ass Cybertruck. Oh my god, what a fucking there's just so many over here. Just I don't, I can't get sidetracked on that one. That one was just too
I
much.
do miss the brief period of time where people were just like lighting them on fire and stuff like that. Like
Yup, keying them. There was like a big keying them thing here in New York for a little bit. It was pretty hilarious. I was like, oops. But
All right, let's see. I don't think I have anything else.
no.
They do not go to a mall in the movie, which is an interesting thing, but that comes up in some other Hughes stuff, I feel like, doesn't it?
I think
I don't know.
I think that's because it's a city. I
Yeah,
think
I do too.
yeah.
Yeah, we didn't reference the go
Go
bada,
better,
go
better,
bada,
better,
go
better,
bada, so
sweet better.
bada.
Yeah.
Um, Jeannie did nothing wrong. She deserved better. Absolutely. I'm pitching Ferris to is 3 hours of Ferris getting wrecked and finally sent to the gulag. I like it.
Love
I
it.
would of course,
Make that
this would
that's an
really
AI movie I would watch.
it would unfortunately, like, we would love it, but the right wing would be like, "See, this is what the left wants
Oh
to do."
man. Oh man. Stalinists! We told you they are Stalinists. We told you. The trots would be out.
We will have to do Soul Man at
Woo!
some point. Oh,
Woo! Yeah, I think now that I'm out of school, we could do that. That was gonna be heavy. That's gonna be a heavy one.
yeah. All right, I think that's it. Oh, I don't know if you know. I didn't know the Heathers. I'd have to look into this, but it would be
Mm-hmm.
interesting to compare the kind of ideology Hughes movies have vis-a-vis high school to say Heathers. Heathers is also about a white high school, but has a different approach, although also problematic. So
Yeah,
I'll go
yeah,
back.
yeah. We should definitely do Heather's. I would definitely like to get someone who watched it a lot when they were younger because I didn't. But I know Heather's. I know Heather's has such a purchase. It's like it's definitely one that has like a real. We definitely should do it, and still has a lot of like love.
We would have to get somebody because I also didn't watch that movie when I was growing
Mm-mm,
up. So,
mm-mm.
all right. All right, y'all. This was good.
Yeah.
We'll be back. We had to figure out next week, but
Well, next week
yeah,
I'm out. Next week I'm
you're out
on
too. Yeah.
a family vacation. But once we hit the week after that,
Congrats.
we're fat. Yeah, we haven't taken a trip in for so
Okay, good.
family
All
vacation.
right.
But yeah, but a couple
All
of
right. So
weeks. We
we'll
have a
be
couple ideas. I think I know what I'm gonna try to get Jada do. I think I know what I'm gonna promote. We talked about it a
there's a
little
lot to
already.
do.
Oh god, there's
Yeah,
so many. There's so many we
I
haven't
know.
touched. It's hilarious.
All right. All right,
All right,
everybody. Have
y'all.
a good week. All right. Peace.